Good evening. Members of the public are encouraged to participate in meetings by one, accessing the webcast at www.cityofclovis.com/agendas. Two, providing written comments at the same website. Three, participating by phone, or four, coming to the City Council meeting in person. I'll call this meeting to order. The flag salute will be led by Councilmember Bessinger.
Please join me in saluting our Republic. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Ashbeck? Here. Councilmember Bessinger?
Here.
Councilmember Monitor?
Here.
Councilmember Whalen?
Here.
And Mayor Flores.
And I'm here. Okay, first order of business, presentation proclamation. Our first proclamation will be a presentation of proclamation declaring May 9th through the 15th, 2022 as National Salvation Army Week, and it will be presented by Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you. If we could have, I think it's Captain Jenny and Kalani come up to the podium, and Shauna. I'll read the proclamation. Maybe you guys can make a few comments afterwards. National Salvation Army Week. Whereas the Salvation Army has been providing hope to men, women, children, and senior citizens across America since 1879, and whereas the Salvation Army serves to meet human needs by utilizing its foundation and mission of soup, soap, and salvation without discrimination in over 5,000 communities nationwide, and whereas the Salvation Army is celebrating the 68th annual National Salvation Army Week, which was first declared by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1954 as a time to honor the organization's work, and whereas the Salvation Army is a nonprofit agency that encourages volunteerism and donations to charity, and whereas the Salvation Army serves more than 40 million Americans in need each year, with 83 cents of every dollar raised going directly to support services, and 100% of its funds raised for emergency disasters going directly to the disaster. And whereas the Salvation Army has been a service agency in the city of Clovis for over 30 years, providing help to our community by providing meals, food pantry, shelter, clothing, financial emergency services, and other necessary assistance with over 56,000 annual individual interactions with citizens. And whereas the Salvation Army is continually expanding programs to the community, including the Pathway of Hope program to end the cycle of poverty, and whereas the Clovis City Council encourages Americans and community members to express their appreciation for the Salvation Army's good works and to follow their example of serving a cause greater than themselves this week, now therefore be it resolved that the City of Clovis does hereby declare May 9th through the 15th, 2022 as National Salvation Army Week. In witness, therefore, I hereinto set my hand and cause the official seal of the City of Clovis to be affixed this 9th day of May, 2022, and it's signed by our Mayor, Jose Flores. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. If you don't already know them, these are our Salvation Army captains, Captain Kalani and Jenny Onasuka Adams. They've been here in Clovis for 6 years and are just an amazing couple and been doing some really good work in our community. Although about 2 minutes ago, they informed me of some sad news, and that is that they're being relocated by Salvation Army. So they'll be moving to Washington. We'll have a new captain or a lieutenant coming in at the end of June. So besides the appropriateness of the Proclamation for National Salvation Army Week, I think it's also our opportunity to thank them for serving our community for the years that they were here. I'll give them an opportunity to speak as well.
Well, my wife just said, all you. As you mentioned, yes, we will be transferred to Washington at the end of June. I do want to say it has been an honor being in this city and serving the people of this city, and I got to see the hearts and how big it is in this city. And this city will have a place in my heart, and I will always love to come back and visit and see friends, family, and also just see our fellow soldiers in the Salvation Army continually doing their work. We've had a great opportunity to start many programs at our location here in Clovis, and I'm hoping that it's still going to continue with the new officer, and I'm sure she has other visions for the Corps and for the Salvation Army, and we're just going to continue to serve and do what we can to meet the needs, the human needs in our community. And it's just been a privilege and an honor to serve, so we're so grateful to be here.
Thank you. We have a proclamation here for you that we'd like to give you.
We are not.
I think you're going to want to get a picture with you guys.
Get close. The next
I
presentation.
think Bong might want to.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Captain, I wanted to just thank you for the work that you've done. I've seen you two so involved in many things in the community. Thank you for the food drives that happen on the Wednesdays to feed so many families. I see how long that line is and the many families that benefit from it, because many times people forget that even in Clovis there are those who are hungry, and you kept that going. You helped started many of the youth programs, and you both are very heavily involved in O-Town, but also in Rotary. You two involved a lot. So thank you so much. We're going to miss you guys. God bless you both up in Washington. Okay, thank you.
Okay, second presentation is a small token of our appreciation, certificates of appreciation to the Citizens Advisory Committee on our Public Safety Committee, and these will be read off by Casey.
All right, so we do have several members of the Citizens Advisory Committee joining us today. So as I call your name, please come on up to the front and get your certification as well as a challenge coin from our council, and we'll take a quick photo as well. All right, first we have Committee Chair Chris Casado.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just start with you.
And then Committee Vice Chair Greg Newman. Enrique Avila. Karen Bach. Terrible. Adriana Boyajian. Stacy Brinkley. Noah Elbaz. Thomas Close. Diane Pierce. David Samarco. LaDonna Snow. And Rachel Udelman. If I missed anybody else, please come on up. We do have your certificate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You got LaDonna. No, private. And a pin? We need how many? Two? One more. One more what? Pack.
David, if you can send your tiptoes, I'll be out of the picture.
Okay, well, we'll have to,
I said, if you send your tiptoes, I'll be out of the picture.
well, get over here, all right.
Awesome. I'm better to be off.
Sure. Please.
Mr. Mayor, council members, and staff, on behalf of myself, Mr. Newman, and all of our committee here, we want to also thank all of you for the confidence that you put in having us serve on this committee. It was an honor to represent our community. And along with that, we all felt that you set yourselves up to be a little vulnerable by opening up what you did for us to see, kind of open the books more or less, for us to see the in-depth workings of the city, the community, and our department that we were working on. So the fact that you, like I said, opened up so much to let us in, it's appreciated. It shows what the dedication of this council to our community, and so we all appreciate it. And on behalf of all the committee members, we thank you guys also. So appreciate the work you do. Thank you very much. We're good?
Good. Next item of business is public comments. This is an opportunity for the members of the public to address the City Council on any matter within the City Council's jurisdiction that is not listed on the agenda. In order to be heard, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, or 10 minutes per topic. Anyone wishing to be placed on the agenda for a specific topic should contact the City Manager's office and submit correspondence at least 10 days before the desired date of appearance. Does anyone want to address the council on any public comment within our jurisdiction? Anyone on the web?
No.
Okay, we'll move on. Ordinances and resolutions. With respect to the approval of resolutions and ordinances, the reading of the title shall be deemed a motion to waive a reading of the complete resolution or ordinance, and unless there is a request by a council member that the resolution or ordinance be read in full, further reading of the resolution or ordinance shall be deemed waived by unanimous consent of the council. Next item is consent calendar. Items considered routine in nature are to be placed upon the consent calendar. They will all be considered and voted upon in one vote as one item unless the council member requests individual consideration. Council members' vote in favor of the consent calendar is considered and recorded as a separate affirmative vote in favor of each action listed. Motions in favor of adoption of the consent calendar are deemed to include a motion to waive the reading of any ordinance or resolution on the consent calendar. For adoption of ordinances, only those that have been received, that receive a unanimous vote upon introduction are considered consent items. Does the council wish to pull any item from 3 to 7 on the consent calendar? Anyone here present in the audience wishing to pull an item from our consent calendar? See none. What about the web?
None.
Okay, so
I'll make a motion that we approve the items on the consent calendar.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So it's a 5-0 vote for approval. Administrative items are matters on the regular City Council agenda other than public hearings. Item 8, workshop for the City Council to consider options addressing the findings and recommendations provided by the Citizens Advisory Committee regarding the Police Department staffing and funding. And our staff member will be our City Manager, John Holt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start off with a brief background. In January, the City Council appointed 25 individuals to a Citizens Advisory Committee. The City Council requested the CAC complete 3 tasks. The task 1 was to review services of the police department that they provide, and 2, to review spending, staffing patterns. Task 2 was to evaluate how has the city maintained the safest city in the valley position and evaluate level of resources needed. Finally, task 3 was to report out spending and staffing in the police department and report out levels of service provided by the police department and to report out level of resources needed by the police department. Continuing background, a total of 6 meetings were held from January through April. On April 6th, the joint meeting was held between the Council and the Citizens Advisory Committee. At that meeting, the CAC presented Council their findings. And their finding 1 was a majority of the committee do not feel that the current staffing and funding is adequate. Finding number 2 is a majority of the committee agree that additional sworn police officers are needed. Finding 3 is a majority of the committee agree that if an increase in services and resources is pursued, it should be funded by some form of tax increase. And finally, finding 4 was 50% of the committee ranked public safety as the most important service the city provides. In the staff report, I identified questions that during this workshop, Council may consider, and I'll circle back to them at the end of the presentation. The first is going to be, does the City Council desire to add additional sworn officers? And by this, I mean in addition to the additional 3 that we plan to add per year in the 5-year forecast. Question 2, if yes, to question 1, what is Council's desire for funding additional officers? Question 3, does the Council support a tax measure? Question 4, if so, when would Council recommend a measure be put on the ballot? Question 5, would City Council consider the use of a consultant? Question 6 is going to be what type of tax, and by that I mean a sales tax or a parcel tax, that type of thing. Question 7 is a general tax or a special tax, and I'll get to those in a minute. Question 8 was a city ballot measure or a citizen initiative. And then 9 is just a catch-all of any other options Council may recommend or consider. As far as raising revenue options, one option for Council to consider to fund the additional police officers is to impose a tax. With voter approval, the city may impose a variety of taxes. Taxes fall into 1 of 2 categories, and again, I'll get into these next. A general or a special tax. A general tax is unrestricted use of the funds. You can spend it how you wish. It requires a majority vote approval, which is the 50% plus 1, and a general tax must be consolidated with a regularly scheduled general election, and that would be your November even year when you guys run for office. Compared to a special tax, the use of the revenues for a specific purpose, such as public safety. Compared to a general tax, a special tax requires a 2/3 supermajority vote by the voters, and that would be 66.67%. And a special tax can be conducted at either a special election or a general election. Next, I'd like to just really quickly go through the types of taxes that Council could consider. The first of which is going to be sales and use tax. A sales tax is a percentage of the sale of goods. Clovis' current rate is the 7.975, comparatively with the city of Fresno, which is at 8.35. The California state sales tax base is going to be the 7.25%, and a sales tax can be presented to the voters in either a special or a general election. The next tax you can consider is going to be a transient occupancy tax, or referred to as TOT. TOT is a percentage of the hotel, motel, or lodging charges. To date, there's no cap. Currently at 10% in the city of Clovis, and just comparatively, it's 12% in the city of Fresno. And here again, this can be either, a TOT can be either a general or a special tax. Council could consider a utility users tax. The city may impose a utility users tax on utility services such as water or sewer. The state of California has 482 cities in it, and over 150 cities level utility user rates varying from 1 to 11%. And the utility users tax can either be a general or a special tax. Council could consider a parcel tax. A parcel tax is a special tax on a parcel or unit of real property. A parcel tax are generally based on a flat per parcel rate. And a parcel tax requires a two-thirds voter approval for either a general or special. Next, I wanted to talk about the success rates over the past two cycles. You can see a couple of charts here, and this is statewide data. And the first one is from 2020. If you take a look at the top sales tax, you'll see that 60 of 71 measures passed in 2020. A parcel tax below that, 14 of 30 passed. A TOT, 14 of 18 passed. Just some examples. And I also went back and took a look at 2018. Excuse me. In 2018 for sales tax, 52 of 58 were approved. Parcel tax, 22 of 41. And for TOT, 28 of 31 were approved. So in looking at those 2 years, 18 and 20, on average, general taxes are approved by voters 86% of the time looking at those 2 years, compared to a special tax that are approved by 56 voters of the time looking at 2018 and 20. There's one other slight curve that in the taxes that we can take a look at, but in 2020, a court held that Fresno's Measure P, which was for parks, it was a special tax citizen initiative, was approved by 52% of the vote, despite being a special tax. The court determined that the two-thirds special tax voter approval requirement was applicable only for special taxes imposed by a local government compared to a citizen's initiative. So the bottom line is going to be that a special tax citizen initiative requires approval of only a simple majority of votes cast to be approved by the voters. All right, and then kind of going back to the initial study that was done by the police department that was presented to City Council in November of 2021. Kurt presented, and this is going to be from the analysis of basically what the need would be, what he's looking at, and realistically this would be, if approved, something that would be implemented over probably a 4 to 7 year period. But here he's indicating the need for an additional 50 sworn officers and 27 support for the 50 sworn, for a total of 77 positions. So if it was a perfect world and the chief could hire them tomorrow, the year one cost would be an estimated $20 million, and the ongoing cost would be approximately $13 million. But again, it's likely to be implemented over a 3 to 5, 4 to 7 year period. The next thing I wanted to take a look at was going to be how much revenue would be generated by tax type. And here again, these are just estimates. If you take a look at sales tax, if we did a 1% sales tax increase, would generate approximately $25 million annually. Comparatively, a half cent would do 12.5, et cetera. A parcel tax, an example, if we had 36,000 units or residential units, parcels taxed at $200 per year, that would generate an additional $7.2 million. The TOT is a smaller number, but it's still there. It's going to be a 2% increase, taking it from 10 to 12, would generate an additional $450,000 to $550,000 per year. Finally, a utility user tax, a similar example, 36,000 rooftops taxed at $10 per month or $20 bi-monthly would generate approximately $4.3 million per year. So it just kind of gives you an order of magnitude on what different types of tax would generate. I wanted to note there is some volatility to the taxes. The most volatile taxes include TOT and sales tax because during a recession, people spend less on sales tax and less on travel. A parcel tax and a utility tax are less volatile. Next, taking a look at the timing of when something could get before the voters. In order to get a measure on the ballot for November of 22, everything would need to be turned into the county clerk no later than August 12th of 2022. And staff would recommend a deadline of August 1st because that's our last regularly scheduled meeting in August. And finally, kind of getting back to the questions I brought up in the front end, then I'd like to open it up for discussion. One, does City Council desire to add additional officers beyond the 3 in the 5-year forecast per year? If yes, what does Council desire for funding additional officers? Does the City Council support a tax measure? If so, when would Council recommend a measure be placed on the ballot? Would council consider the use of a consultant to assist? And that consultant would be used to do polling and that type of stuff to determine whether the voters would support a general tax or a special tax, and what kind of volume they'd be supportive of or not supportive of. Question number 6 was what type of tax, and there, I mean, were we looking at a sales tax or a property tax or some combination? Question 7 is a general tax or a special tax, with general being able to spend the money wherever council desires to, over the special tax, which would be dedicated to a particular function, public safety, police department, fire department, but it would be dedicated. Then the city ballot measure or citizens initiative. And then 9 is kind of the catch-all for other options council may consider or recommend. So in conclusion, at this point, staff would be looking for some discussion at the council level for policy direction moving forward, considering the recommendations made by the CAC. Some options for council to consider. 1 is going to be to direct staff to continue to evaluate revenue option in preparation for the 23 or 24 tax to be imposed. 2, direct staff to investigate implementing a 2% increase in TOT for November of 22, which would generate an additional $450,000 to $550,000 per year. That could be used to hire an additional 2 or 3 officers in the next 2 years. 3 would be to continue to evaluate general fund revenues on an ongoing basis, as we do now, and authorize more than the 3 planned per fiscal year if revenues are adequate. And that's pretty much staff's position right now. And then again, a catch-all other that the council may provide direction on. That concludes staff's report. Between Scott, Andy, and I, we are available for questions.
Questions for city manager?
Either you or Chief, with regards to the 32 new officers needed, how practical is it to get to that number in 1 year? Would it take 5 years? So that way we understand the need as you presented, Chief, but you know, how soon can we realistically hire? Because right now we want to get to 109 and that's budgeted. So are you set to hire 109 by the end of this fiscal year, or are we also having difficulty already? So even if we give you the money, it's still the reality of the timing of getting bodies in may take longer than what you were projecting.
My goal right now is to be fully staffed at 112 by July 1st of this year. We have 4 in the police academy. Currently have 106, and with that 4, and then hoping to hire a few laterals in between. So the goal right now is to be fully staffed at 112, which will be the new number with the new fiscal year starting July 1. So that's the goal. Last year we hired 14 officers. So if we were given, 14 additional positions, could I hire those? It would be a challenge to maintain what we currently have staff with retirements, but to also hire 14 additional new officers. But we're up for that challenge. We have kind of in the works right now a new cadet program. We're trying to get 10 cadets on staff and keep them within the police department over a 3-year period before we put them through the police academy. So we have kind of that built-in line of new officers kind of learning our different positions within the department, us getting to know them and making sure they're a good fit, and then having that stream of candidates along with the ones that we're in the police academy that we're hiring. So to answer your question, I think if you gave us 10 additional bodies in the year, we could meet that and we could hire those bodies.
So 10 a year is realistic then?
That's realistic with what we currently have in retirements and people that leave due to injuries. I think 10 to 15 a year is obtainable in new hires.
Okay. And John, on these initiatives, these options, can you combine a couple, or would you, if you did a user and then a parcel and then a sales, will it be 3 different initiatives on the ballot, or can you combine it all as one and hopefully it gets all 3 into one shot?
It would be 3 different measures. So it would be 3 different tax measures that the voter would have to consider. So you can't combine them.
Yeah. So Chief, with, let's say we do the 10, which one gets you to the 10? Do you need that 7.2 million? Is it the 4.3 of the utility? I mean, what's that number that gets you 10? I'd like to know that number, so that way we know your need and we know sort of that gap that we need to get there.
I'd rather not have Kurt answer that.
Okay.
As far as, 10 officers, we'd have to go back and take a look at, part of the study that would need to be done, going back to the voters, would be, what they would, first of all, how much money we're trying to generate, what, taxes or combination of taxes would make sense for us to implement, what would be the success rate, looking at the history of the success rate. And if you take a look at, I mentioned that the sales tax 1%, which would basically double the sales tax in the city of Clovis, that would generate $25 million. And so that would give you year one funding, and then we would have approximately $25 million a year after that. If you were to do a half-cent sales tax, that would generate the $12.5 million estimated, and that would likely be able to support the 10 officers per year for 5 years.
John, you mentioned also one of the options was to take less or take some out of the emergency reserves. Can you kind of go over that scenario?
Yes. In the 5-year forecast, we have forecasted putting monies into the reserves. One option that council does have is to put less money into the reserves, which is a rainy day fund, and fund some additional police officers. The downside from staff's perspective is going to be that council would be obligating one-time monies for ongoing costs, and staff would not recommend that.
Okay. That's my questions for now.
Drew, when do our PERS rates start to go down? Was that 2031?
It's 31 or 32, and I'll look at Jay to give me a nod right there. So 10 years from now, we're estimating that our PERS rates will begin to decline.
So conceivably, if whatever you decide, sales tax, property tax, and the voters vote for it, we could put on the ballot that this is it sunsets in 10 years like we did with Measure A 15 years ago when we built the police department?
That's correct. It would be one consideration to put to the voters.
And the TOT, the transient occupancy tax, our hotels were very stable during during the pandemic, right?
Correct.
And that would give us
450 to 550,000.
Which would give us approximately
2 to 3.
4.5 positions a year?
2 to 3.
Okay. And the citizens initiative portion versus something that we put up, how would a grassroots effort like that start?
The city would not be involved in a citizen initiative, and it would generally be by a group of people who would go through the process to get the initiative on the ballot, and that would be working with the city clerk and the city attorney and using the elections code and getting something on the ballot, and generally speaking, the use of a consultant to assist them.
So it would be basically what we did in 2006? I forget when.
Well, 2009 Measure A was a city measure.
That was a city measure?
It was.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Thank you.
I have a question about, I think there's probably 19 more questions than you have up there. So I don't want it to come down to the tax question necessarily. The Community Facilities District, there was occasional mention in the citizens' work. I know you all talked about that. I think one of the huge errors we made as a city is not paying attention to that in terms of the revenue it generated. Because I think when that was approved, the intent was that it would pay its way. There were comments in here about, that sort of unchecked growth, and so I want to be sensitive to that question. But Community Facilities District is what kind of a fee or tax, a parcel tax?
It is, it's a Mello-Roos, which would
Okay.
be a parcel tax. The way it works right now with the, CFD we have in place is, home, and Jay, you're gonna help me out here, north of Herndon, east of Locan, every new home, there's about 5,000 that have been built since 2004, and they pay, $275 in additional property taxes to pay for the services for being farther away from the center of town. And when we did that, we probably, undervalued the actual cost, but it was fixed, and you'd have to go back to the voters to completely change it. You know, Scott, maybe you can help me out, but if, it is a little bit complicated because it would require quite a bit of analysis and a nexus study, to value the cost, and it would be probably be a citywide vote, and that citywide vote would be to approve the CFD, and it would likely to be to undo the existing CFD. Scott, jump in.
Yeah, I think, we haven't done a heavy, in-depth analysis on the CFD, other than to know that it was set at a rate at the time in 2004 when it was initially established for developing areas in the city. So only the new development since 2004 is included in the CFD. It is a special tax, but it's set at a set rate. So we're restricted as to what, we can't just increase it if we want to. We'd have to go back to the voters. As far as doing a citywide CFD, that would take quite a bit of analysis, and I guess my suggestion is I think a city parcel tax would be easier to implement than making the CFD citywide. And that could be a consideration, you know, if the council had a desire, or if there was even a citizen initiative to put a parcel tax on the ballot. If that parcel tax did get approved, the council could have the choice to unwind the CFD at that point, because it would almost be a lot of the same services would be funded, so to speak. But if it was a citywide parcel tax as opposed to just a CFD in only the new or developing areas of the city, I guess would be a consideration.
I mean, I think that's interesting because it's, I don't think we can draw a line between the money collected and the houses that are paying for it. I think if I live, whatever you just said, north of this and east of that, the funds aren't set aside to pay just for those officers. So to me, I think that probably needs some unwinding or rethinking anyway. But I wonder if there's something in there, and I guess I'm not understanding why it's more complicated. It seems like it's the same thing, which I'm sure it's not. But if you could unwind the existing CFD, apply it to the entire city, because we all get this, that's the point. So I mean, I'm sure, I believe you that it's more complicated, but I'm kind of interested in knowing a little bit more about that, or how I mean, it's almost 20 years since we did that, so you can't undo what we did, but we surely should have looked at it or asked for some increase or something over time, but that ship has already sailed. So anyway, I'm a little bit interested in that. I'm not quite sure, I don't get the difference between that and a parcel tax, but interested in that idea.
Yeah, if I could just add, parcel tax, to put any of these measures on a ballot, doesn't require an in-depth study. I mean, we can do a study as to sales tax increase or parcel tax increase or that sort of thing. But for a Mello-Roos district, the CFD does require a consultant to do an analysis of, okay, what's the cost of providing services in a certain area? You have to fund that over a certain period of time, a certain number of parcels. You have to apply a rate and method of apportionment, how that gets apportioned out. So we have to have all that information available first to have like an in-depth study prepared for the CFD. You don't necessarily have to have an in-depth study to put a parcel tax measure on the ballot.
I remember Harry didn't ever think those were good over time, that they were sort of more complicated than they were worth, but that's interesting.
And if I could just add, the parcel tax and the CFD it's a special, tax, so it would require a 2/3 vote, and the success rate of, the parcel or CFD compared to a sales tax or a parcel tax is, much less.
Lynn, I have a question to clarify.
Sure.
Isn't the CFD fire and police, and this parcel that we're talking about here is more just for police? And so do we need to be more clear about it, or is CFD strictly police?
Well, in this case, if I could just clarify what we have in place right
Yeah.
now, we have a CFD for public safety.
Public safety.
And public safety, the split is the revenues that we get is split 2/3 police, 1/3 fire. And you would have to clarify, when we went through and did this, is this a CFD for the police department? Is it for
Yeah.
public safety? Is it?
Okay.
Bob?
So we've got Measure Z that's on the ballot in June, presumably, right? And is Measure C gonna be on the ballot in November, or do we know that yet?
As far as we know, we are,
That's kind of the
yeah, we are on track to be on
authority
the,
is
yeah,
going
on
in
the
that
structure,
direction.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have some follow-up from Fong's questions to you, Chief. Okay, so we programmed 3 new members per year for the next 5 years. And then your attrition is usually what? How many people do you lose either by retirement or service retirement per year? Is there an average?
On average, it's been historically like 6 to 7. Last year was 14.
Okay, so those are 14, wow.
Yeah.
But let's say 7. So with 3 plus 7 is 10 additional new staff members, officers. Does the police department today have the capacity to fully train these 10 new staff members? Because 10 will be authorized, and then 7 will be authorized, and 3 will be the new ones coming from our new budget. So that's 10 brand-new people. I understand you'll have laterals, and therefore they will require less training to get on board. But the brand-new people coming out of academies, you will have a substantial amount of time needed to get them up to standards. So can the department handle, on average, 10 brand-new people a year?
Yeah, so with this, the 14 that retired last year or left the workforce, and then the 14 we hired, in the last 5 months, we've actually had 10 people in the training process. And of the 10, looks like 8 of the 10 will make it, and 2 have not been successful in the training program. So that's something else we have to take into consideration. Just because we hire them and put them in the training program doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be successful. So 80% for the current 10 that we have, and so that created 2 additional spots that we're looking to fill by July 1st.
So, go ahead.
The last time I had spoke, July 1, we're right on track to be fully staffed, and with these 2 vacancies, we're hoping some laterals that we have in the process will pan out before July 1. So we'll either be fully staffed July 1 or just too shy because of the 2 that we lost in the training program.
Every authorized position should be fully staffed. So those that left by attrition, you rehire the new people, and then the new bodies that we've authorized, the 3, those will be on board as well.
That's correct.
And we can sustain that for 5 years?
We would love to have the opportunity to do that. We've brought our corporals, historically, back many years ago, were our FTO, our field training officers. We went away from that and had them focus more on beat integrity and meet the chiefs of their beats. And our field training officers are people that we promoted to be, in a supervisor position for the future and taking on our training of our new employees. Because of the circumstances we're in right now, we brought our corporals back along with our FTOs. Everybody's on board of getting our new people properly trained, up to speed, and hired. But I will guarantee you, we were not going to just hire anybody. We won't settle for what Clovis has always historically hired. The best of the best is what we consider. And if you're not making the training program, we're not going to just force you through to get that number. If you're not making it, you're not making it. And I think that's shown with, out of the last 10 that we had to cut 2 people, and it is what it is. We need the bodies, but we're not going to put people out there that are going to be unsafe or not properly trained.
Okay, so say we do get more revenue, or we find it in our current budget through the reserve, and now you're talking about, I don't know, maybe as much as 3 new officers per year. So now that number is not 10 average, it's 13 average. Are we still sustainable? Can we still manage that with their training officers and training program and hiring that kind of people every year? Because attrition happens. That's almost, you can almost count on that. And so now you'll have anywhere from 3 to 6 brand new additional officers funded.
I think I could say that, I'm confident that we could hire 10 to 15 people a year and be comfortable in doing that and being successful.
So 15 people a year would be, you can carry that. You have the wherewithal within the department today to train them properly so they can be out on the streets.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And just, if you take out the 5-year forecast right now and the 3-year that we have, and you take that to the end of the 5 years, that puts us at 124 officers. Our population currently is 124,000, roughly. So if our population did not grow over the next 5 years, we would be at 1 officer per 1,000 at the end of this 5-year forecast. We have to know that our city is, I think, the 4th fastest growing this last year of cities over 100,000. So it's not, I think, too far of a stretch to believe that we're not going to continue to grow. So at the rate we're going right now, we're still going to be 0.9 per capita at the rate we're going, even with these 3 additional bodies that we're adding.
Okay, so the first question that staff has asked us is, do we want to increase staffing beyond the 3 proposed ones? That's the first one. Beyond the 3 per year over 5 years, does the council desire to add additional sworn officers? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking somewhere in the average of 50 new officers that the Clovis PD will have every year because of attrition, because of 3, and whatever new revenue we find. That revenue we need to find will pay for the additional, whatever that is going to be. We know about the +3, but once we have revenue, how many more do we need per year? And the chief's telling us that they can sustain a training force for 15 new officers per year, which is, they're almost there anyway. So that's the first big question before us. Do we want additional officers?
Probably the easiest question up there.
Huh?
Probably the easiest question up there. Of course we do. Meeting adjourned.
So, the consensus, yes?
I have a question with regards to that. Chief, I want to know the urgency, because if our officers, at point 8, they're stressed, I need them today. I need them now because they're overworked. We need to know that. But if it's, 5-year forecast, you give me the 15, we'll still make do. I hear sometimes in the numbers, but I don't hear it in they are overworked. We aren't, we need to save the men and women who are serving us right now with more bodies. And whether the POA, if they're here, we need to hear that. So, or should we just assume that, because we're under, because we're pointing. So are we to just assume, hey, we are, because crime is getting higher, they're overworked. And I'd like to know that urgency, because without adding anything, you'll get sort of the 10, right? 7 retiring, 3 that we've already put in the budget. So, yeah, that'll allow us, even with us moving at a maybe not a slower pace, but at a pace in which will make this successful for you. But if not, then okay, then we need to talk about it more urgently, meaning then how do we do it? How do we get it in November? What is it that we need to best help the department?
I think just seeing that there's some direction, some future light at the end of the tunnel. When COVID hit and we lost those 9 vacancies that we were holding, plus the injuries, it was a morale killer. people, I think if you look at last year, we had 14 people leave the workforce. That has never happened. That's double what we normally see. People are, we're at 150%. We're shooting for an overtime just to cover shifts. Somebody calls in sick, somebody else is getting ordered in from their day off to work. That can only be sustained so long. So to answer your question directly, people are tired, people are stressed. It takes a mental toll to be successful every day, to go out and do this job and not make mistakes, and to be able to deal with the scrutiny that comes down. So we definitely need extra officers. For officers to see that there is a future where we're going to grow, that alone would be a morale boost. But how many do we need tomorrow? If we had 32 additional bodies, which is to supplement what we lost over the last 15 years, plus to grow what we should have grown over the last 15 years, is a good number to shoot for, not even taking into what the future growth is of the city. But somewhere in there, some movement, some growth is going to be, anything is going to be better than where we're at currently.
Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but in some of the reports I've read so far, especially the ones coming out of the advisory committee, is that your department is not doing some things, more proactive policing, community-oriented policing, because you don't have the level of staffing you would need to do those ancillary, very important duties, because they're all dedicated to patrol.
Correct.
Is so that's an urgency part of it?
Absolutely. I mean, I came here in 2006. I learned the Clovis way. It is different here. We're expected as officers to do from the smallest thing to the largest thing, wear many hats, not drive by things and ignore them. Those things are starting to occur. It drives me crazy to go out and drive around this community and see neighborhoods starting to fall apart, RVs, boats, cars that are broken down and not being addressed by our officers. And don't think it's not frustrating for our officers to drive by those things, because they're going to calls that are higher priority, but we're ignoring the things that are going to slowly erode what Clovis is all about, and what our department's culture is about is dealing with the small things, a full service department, and we don't want to go down that road. And that was really my reasoning for feeling obligated to come to council in November to say, this is where we're at, this is where we're headed. We need to make some serious decisions to keep Clovis, to keep our police department cutting edge, being a full service department. Otherwise, we're going to have to make some critical choices and decide what's most important to respond to for our community's safety.
Let me add on to that. So does the 10 just maintain what we currently have, or does the 10 allow you to add 3 more duties to what you say we are not doing? Because that's important to me as a council member, because if the 10 only just maintains, then we're not doing much for you, okay? But if the 10 goes, oh yeah, if you do the 10, we can start youth services next year. Once we get them all on, we can start graffiti, whatever. I can start these other things, then that gives me hope. But if it's, oh no, we need 15 in order to, if you want to do that, council member, to put these services back up, I need 15 each year. And so that's where I need to hear that from you who serve our citizens every day, because I don't want you just to be satisfied going, oh, at least you're going in the right way. To me, no, that's not satisfactory enough. You see, we need to get to where you as a chief and we as a council go, that's a safe city. Give me this number however you can. Okay, then we can decide, can't get you 40, but we'll get you 25. That'll be our decision. That's sort of where I need to hear from you.
I need 32 bodies, sworn officers today.
Okay.
To be where we should be, to provide the proper safety, to provide the full service to our citizens. 32 officers today.
I appreciate it.
And just a comment on that, just because we hire 3, that's one shift. Therefore, we're just even. Because it takes that many officers to just staff one shift at either graveyard swing or days. It would take all of three. So we're just putting a finger in the dike because we're not falling back, but we're not going forward.
I guess I was just gonna, the urgency question, I think, it's not the culture of law enforcement to tell you they're in trouble. It's like an ER. If your ER community was falling apart, that's not exactly the message you want to communicate. So to me, I've always thought of law enforcement and ER as a little bit like that. You just do what comes to you because what choice do you have? There isn't like another department that's going to pick that up. So I think it's that, I mean, in my mind, that's how I think about, they're not going to fall apart. They're going to keep going and working more shifts and more shifts. But I think it's just the toll. And in these times in particular, I think it's incredibly difficult to be a law enforcement officer. People aren't maybe aspiring to it at the same rate that they used to when they were kids. Or so I mean, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I think about when I think about your question. It's the same urgency that EDs face, and they never say we can't. They never give up. And that's how I think law enforcement, it's the same. You'll never get that they have too much. And I think the closest we've come is when the chief was here in November saying, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not going to do the retail. I'm not going to, I mean, I think that to me is probably the loudest call for help that we've ever heard. So just an analogy that I think about now.
I think I'm thinking of it from a citizen's perspective. If we don't hear it, why would I vote for it? If I don't know it's safe, why are you taxing me, you see? And so sometimes we have to just be transparent. We need it. And this is the message that we gotta present to the citizens, because you presented it very openly, and when people saw it, they said, oh, you're right. But if we never admit it, then it's just, well, why are these five putting this initiative on to tax the citizens? So we need to be able to really be upfront about it and just say, and whether you saying it to me assures me, and I know what to say moving forward, but I think we all need to be on that same page, that's all.
Yeah.
Sure. Looking at the numbers, a 1% sales tax would generate approximately $25 million. Half cent, 12.5. Quarter cent, 6.25. The parcel taxes around 7.2, and the transit occupancy tax, frankly, doesn't get us close enough to do anything. But my question's about the utility user tax. 4.3 million. How many bodies would 4.3 million a year get us additionally a year?
I'd have to do the analysis, but year one costing for a police officer right now is $300,000 to fully with a vehicle and personal equipment, and it's about $180,000 thereafter. So, Andy, do some math for me.
Because what interests me with the utility user tax is that includes commercial and residential utility tax, right?
Scott, would we include both?
Yeah, it can. It just depends on how you want to write the measure. I mean, those are all eligible, yes. And then it depends on what you want to, what type of utility you want to tax as well.
We've had the landscape maintenance districts have occasionally failed because the owners of the property who don't live here didn't support it, and the people who were, the renters didn't care. A utility tax, if we apply it to commercial and residential, it does garner us, and I don't know how many positions, probably 8 or 10, I'm just guessing here. And it is probably more likely, at least in my mind, to pass than potentially a sales tax or a parcel tax. I mean, I get that people believe, and they're not incorrect, that they're already being taxed enough. This one, a utility user tax, doesn't hurt as much because it really spreads the wealth or the burden. And it includes out-of-town people who own large rental properties, you know, where they have 50 apartments or more. It does spread that out a little bit and also gives them, does not give them the opportunity to vote something down or undermine it.
Do they vote for that, though? Who votes for it, the property owner or the renter?
Well, it would be whoever they have to be physically a citizen of Clovis,
So whoever the water bill's in their name?
Right, well, no, I don't know, it's a good question.
Yeah, the measure is gonna be the citizen, well, it's gonna go to the voters of Clovis, yes.
Right, so if I'm from Burlingame, and I own 150 units here, I get the bill for this, but I don't get to vote no or yes to it. Is that correct?
I think I understood your question. You've got to be a registered voter of Clovis in order to vote on the tax, right? You may be subject to the tax if you're an out-of-towner,
Right.
not eligible to vote, correct?
Okay, I guess that's all I have for now.
But that requires a two-thirds majority?
No, it's, utility users tax could be a general or special tax.
Okay.
And Mayor, if I could add, so the amounts that John provided were just ideas, but at that level, it would generate enough funding ongoing for 20 to 24 officers per year, and we would need one-time money of $2.4 million to adequately equip them. That's for the utility.
And just keep in mind the $200 example I provided was just that, to give you an order of magnitude. So if we were directed to move in that direction, we'd more properly identify the actual funding needed, which would drive the actual dollar value that we'd recommend as far as utility users or a parcel tax or.
So the 200 was a ballpark?
It was just throwing it out there to give you an idea of what it could generate. And I was just thinking of what was in a CFD. And I just want to keep council aware that as far as success rates, sales tax is much more successful than a parcel tax. A general tax is much more successful than a special tax. So if you were to go with a special parcel tax, you're setting yourself up.
I guess I'm concerned if Measure C, which is a very important measure, if there's, and I've done this myself, when I look at all these propositions and tax increase, a lot of times I just voted no on everything. And I'd hate to see us cause Measure C to fail or Measure C to cause us to fail. And I realize the utility user tax is still a tax, but it's not a sales tax or a property tax. So it does get us, and I guess probably I would like, and that'll be something we all discuss, I'd like to get a little bit more information on that, because that might hurt the least and potentially be the most successful, but I don't know.
And if I could just add, just a reminder, in the staff report, I included a comparison of where we were at in March of 2009 compared to where we're at today. For us, the city to be able to get an item on the ballot in less than 90 days to the county clerk would probably do a disservice to the process itself. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of polling. It would be just difficult to get on there. You take a look at what was going on in March of 2009. We were into a Great Recession. Interest rates were going up. Inflation was going up. There were several tax measures on the ballot that were competing. We were standalone, but prior to that. So my point being is going to be that today we're in a similar position that we were in 2009, and I would be hard-pressed to recommend that we rush to get something on the November 22 ballot.
Let's answer the second question. And I think I kind of heard a consensus is, yes, we want to increase additional staffing for our police department. So that was the easy one, according to Lynn. The second one is how? Budget adjustments, use of general fund services, or a potential tax measure. I'm hearing Drew say that a potential tax measure, and he leans towards the utility tax. I'm too in favor of some kind of tax measure that we put this question before the voting public and because we need the money. We're not gonna get it out of the general fund. Law enforcement and fire already get the lion's share of our general fund. You just can't squeeze any more funding out of that without impacting other departments that provide very valuable services to our community, even though their piece of the pie is minimal. And so even if we capture that minimal funding from those other services, it wouldn't amount to beans. So as far as our general fund goes, and even using our reserve, I mean, we need that reserve for a reason. It's sustained us during the hard times, and if we ignore that, we're hurting ourselves too. So, in that second question, what to do? For me, it's some kind of tax measure. I'd like to hear what the council has to say about that.
So I think that I've heard you say the impact, we are grateful for our hotel business, and it has put an added pressure on law enforcement. Maybe more calls for service than we might have imagined, or I don't know, maybe we couldn't even anticipate. So I wonder if it's a hybrid model where I think most people wouldn't have any heart, maybe the chamber, I don't know, any heartburn on a transit occupancy tax that makes us equal to Fresno. Doesn't generate a ton of money, but it gets you $500,000, and that's something. That's this forward progress. And I feel like we will make a mistake if we try to put a sales tax or a utility tax without doing the polling. Just what we've seen in Measure C. It is the most tedious process, but the polling question, 3,000 voters, and are you sure it's this, and what about that, I think is really important. And I think we did that in 2009 and lost anyway, right? We did all that and we lost. Yeah, 2009?
I'd say we won, but I know
You're gonna look great in that
Four out of.
Anyway, so you get my point, but I think we still lost. So I don't want to lose twice. I think that is not the message that matches anything the citizens group said. So I'm wondering if, yes, we need more officers. Yes, we need the added help now. So what if we considered a transit occupancy tax on the November 24 ballot? Again, people coming from outside and covering some of your calls for service. And then we do our homework. I think it should be citizen-driven versus government-driven. Give a citizen group time to organize. We could do a poll. We could see what the temperature is, and we'll see what happens in the war in Ukraine and all the rest to see what happens. I feel like we could be heading into the same recession of 2008, and that's not helpful. So I wonder if there's a hybrid model like that. I think hurrying into this, giving them magnitude of Measure C makes me nervous without time to hire a consultant, poll 2,000 residents, and see where they are. So I think there might be some hybrid in there, something that I would be interested in supporting today to get you some, maybe 1 or 2 additional officers. You could take 3 and then you get 5 a year. That's good. I am not interested in spending the reserves. We've done that before too, and we are never happy we've done that. So it doesn't seem like a super good idea. I think we've also, are there additional ways to do more economic development and get more sales tax in the market? All of those things. It's not just a tax. I think that it's not a single answer to this challenge. Well, that's where I am at the moment. Still early. It's only 7:10, but that's where I am right now.
Drew? I think it would be difficult for us to get all of our ducks in a row to get this in November, because it's certainly a lot of work. Since we're changed from March to November, can elections still be for bond measures? Because I'm assuming that eventually we'll see another school bond. Is there any prohibition against a March initiative?
No, you can actually, but it would be limited to a special tax versus a general tax. So you could, general taxes, which only requires 50% of the vote, can only be done during your regularly scheduled election, which would be November of an even year now. And a special tax can be either November with your election or an off cycle, which could be a March or April.
How much does that generally run us
to conduct the election.
Cost of the city.
A standalone election is much more expensive than the general election. I'm estimating that, a combined election in November will cost us about $50,000 compared to a standalone election, which we paid for in March of '21, which was close to $300,000.
Would there be anything coming up in June? I know we have an election coming up this June. Next June, is there a ballot for something or?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I guess the big thing to remember is going to be that if it was a standalone just for a particular city of Clovis ballot measure, it would be about $300,000. If we were able to consolidate with June, if that was allowed, then it would probably be half that or a quarter of that.
Okay. Thank you.
John, for the special, say next year, but if it's citizen-driven, that court case says it can just be 51%.
That's correct.
So it's no longer
50 plus 1.
Yeah. So that's sort of the sweet spot.
Perfect world.
The easier way, if anything. My thought is, we do it well and we do one shot. Because if we do something in November and we come back in March, the citizens are going, well, why again? So we plan it, we do it, and we do it well, whether it's the citizens or us, but we do it well. I think we owe the citizens a clear plan of what this money will do. So that way, it's something in which we can speak on very intelligently, meaning, if we just go half cent, you'll get $12.5 million. This will allow us, youth services, all that. I think I'd like to see that sort of measurable accounting for it as well, and how it moves us forward. I know you probably have said that to us many times. We probably just didn't hear it well enough, but I think that'll really help me. So.
Then I just wanted to clarify, if it was a city ballot measure in March, it would be a special, and it would require the supermajority, 66.7. And my recommendation for council to consider is to possibly have staff go back and do additional analysis on the total dollars demanded that the police department needs, and recommendations on coming back with a special in 23 or a general in 24. But I would not recommend trying to do something in November of 22. And if pressed, again, you wanted to do something in November of 22, I would recommend that you consider the TOT going from 10 to 12, which will bring the 450 to 550,000, which will add an additional 2 or 3 officers above the 3 that are authorized. So he'd be getting 5 to 6 per year for potentially a 2-year period, where we could come back in November of 24, or if we chose to do a 23, we'd be in a better position.
I wouldn't do a special election for a tax in March, let's say. I'd probably wait until 24. Because I think it's important. It's an important question. I think it takes time to have a plan. So I wasn't suggesting we do a TOT in November and then come back in March. I think we do a TOT because it's a step in the right direction. It's where some of our costs are coming from, and it's progress. And you get 3, and then 3 more, so maybe that's 5 or 6. And then in 24, all right, what year is it? 24, then I think we'd be ready. We could see what happens to the landscape. We could figure that out. I think there's some questions, though, about, I don't want the questions in the citizens work on where we grew without planning. Not true, fair comment, but I think there's some things we need to talk a little bit about. And I think we'd give some time to think about how to unwind the CFD if we did that. So, again, it's more complicated than just the tax. But, so I wasn't suggesting doing it in March. I think we could get a little money into the system now and then in 24.
Sure. When it comes to the hotels, with our staffing, we don't know, because what problems do you get in hotels? Sometimes you have drug sales, sometimes you have human trafficking. And both of those are very manpower intensive to be able to ferret those things out. They don't just usually jump out at you. If we were to decide to put the TOT on the ballot for 2022. It's a small cash infusion, but it's a step in the right direction with a follow-up when we get more information about what do we do with sales tax, property tax, and doing some polling, seeing if there's a interest with citizens to set up a citizen-based initiative, because that changes the nature of stuff, and the ability at 66 supermajority versus 50% plus one. But I mean, I would be in favor of going, because I don't know that people would object to voting for a transient occupancy tax. I just don't see where they would say that's wrong. But Jen, I mean, how many hotels do we have that are currently waiting to open up? I know there's one on Clovis Avenue in Gettysburg.
Yeah, that's the only one currently under construction. We do have a few more in the planning process.
Okay. The one that was at Clovis and Herndon, where is that? Five-story one, or?
They have not been communicative on their plans. They
Okay.
got approval right before the pandemic, and
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well, then brings up a good point, and she's got plenty of experience because of her participation in Measure C. There's not enough time to put anything on the November ballot, but I think anything is what my belief is, based on what I've heard today and based on what the came out of the committee. And Jim said, or Vong said, we got to do it well, and we got to do it well once. Because, and that's why I would have some apprehension regarding the hybrid model, because because that still has to go before the voters, and we're successful in November. That may preclude us from even going to the voters again with a handout and saying, now we need a sales tax. When I say we got to decide, hopefully today, what the direction is, or maybe with the consultant, which is our, I think, our next question, find out what the best chances, one, of success is, and two, when to do it. Because I got a feeling that if you start polling people, doing all the good things that have to be done in a political campaign, because this is what this is going to be, we're going to run out of time, and we won't be ready for November of this year. So I like the idea of a hybrid, but so we get this lesser tax, and now we're kind of stuck with it, because how do we go back to the well and say we need more? So that's my fear, that we can't go to the public and the voting public over and over again crying the same wolf. And so I say let's do it once, do it well, and give ourselves enough time for that, and choose the right vehicle. And for me, obviously, I'm thinking sales tax is as in.
Jose, Bob? Were you first, Bob?
Nope.
The voters look, and I'm speculating, voters looking at a transient occupancy tax may just shrug their shoulders and say, well, I don't stay in a hotel. You know, granted, you know, hey, when my folks come and they're staying in a hotel, it's going to cost them a little bit more. But I think generally speaking, people they're not going to balk at that. Yeah, you're going twice, assuming that we move forward with, hey, we're going to explore a sales tax or a property tax. It's true, we're going to go twice. But can we wait until 23 or 24 to start infusing money into the police department? We can't. I think that gets us part of the way, and then we explore the remainder. But that's my, well.
Yeah, I just want to be accommodating to what I think the mayor is trying to, have us engage in, but also to the public. And, so I'm not participating in the discussion just because I think generally we don't, decide until we've heard from the public. And so maybe, and Jose, maybe this is a question for you, is you're thinking that we've already heard from the public because we've had the Citizens Advisory Committee, and that's why we haven't opened it up to the public yet? And you're asking us to make decisions? Because, I mean, hey, I think people know where I am, so to me to say, well, I'm still thinking about what the public has to say before I communicate my message would be disingenuous, right? But I still want to honor that tradition, and so I'm not saying that you need to change what you're doing, Mayor. I just want to be accommodating both to what you would want us to do and then also with the public, you know, give the public an opportunity to address us before we decide.
Staff has given us a few questions, and we're still stuck at number 2. So, I think the public needs to know where we're going. At least consensus. I don't want decisions, because today we won't be able to make many decisions, but we can start building consensus among the council members. And then once we got some form of consensus, then it's time for the public to come up before us and tell us, you know, you're wet or you're going somewhere. And so that's why I'm trying to go down these questions that were posed to us. If we don't care about the questions, we will just go through. I mean,
well, I don't mean to suggest we don't care about the questions. We do. I just didn't know if you just were intentionally choosing not to open it up to the public before we made these decisions. And if that was fine, then I'm happy to participate in these conversations. But if you want,
I'll ask the council, do we want to go through all these 9 questions posed by staff? Because I think that's what's on the mind of the public, the voting public, the people here, or not. Do we keep them guessing where our position is, or do we try to not make decisions today? Because I'm not expecting any decision, but I am expecting at least some consensus as to direction to give staff as to where we want to be, and then that will give the public here some enough information to tell us, no, you're all wet, you should go this way, or yes, we agree with you. And because let's go by the questions. I mean, does the council support a tax measure? If so, when would council recommend the measure that people put on the ballot? We haven't answered that question. Would council consider using a consultant? We haven't answered that. What type of tax? We haven't answered that. That might not be a question for us today, but what about the consultant and his polling, or her polling? The general tax or special tax? See, that's, again, those are questions that are going to be after us today, because if we hire a consultant, that's the kind of work product we need for them to bring before us so we can make the final decisions as to what we're going to actually do. So today, what I was hoping for is consensus. I think our city manager gave us a good, list of things we need to consider. But if we're ready we don't want to share that information with the public here, we can go straight to the public. But I think they need some measure. We don't have to debate the whole thing to the nitty-gritty. We don't need the details today, because I think we've heard enough in the staff report, and I think we've talked a lot about it. I hear there is no consensus as to what type of tax, but there may be a tax. I have heard no consensus as to when to tax, or at least put it on the ballot, put the question on the ballot. But I'm kind of hearing that November of 22, it might be too soon. So those are questions, I think it's a good blueprint that the staff gave us to start answering before we open it to the public so they can give us their input. And then at the end, of course, do our duty and make some more direct decisions that could give staff, direction.
So, I can answer all of them in a run-on sentence. So, I think, I've already said it, I don't need to repeat myself. Yes, we want more officers. I don't want to use the reserve. I don't know if I support a tax measure right today. I think that's the wrong question. I think we don't know that today. I think we should do the transfer occupancy tax in November. I think we should hire a consultant to do some polling to find out what it is, and I definitely think it should be a citizens initiative, and we can't do it in November, and we should plan for November 24th. That's a run-on sentence. There you have it. That's what I would say.
So I've been waiting because I think you have valuable input, Councilman Whalen, because I think it's important to have that discussion so that way it's healthy to hear, because sometimes we may not think of it, and I think a lot of times when the debate happens up here, it allows at least me to go, okay, I never considered that, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I just wanted to say with regards to what's been proposed to the 2022 transit occupancy, I still think it's just one shot. The public, the voting public in general, does not understand you're taxing that guy who's coming out of town to stay at the hotel. Overall, I'm not saying they just don't have the time to listen and to look at it. All they understand is tax, police. And so because it's that, they just do it one time. That's my thought on that. But for 2022, I think if a citizens group is ready to go running, back them up and let's go. Because crime is high, meaning I think the politics is right now. That's why I think 2022, if the citizens group is willing to take this on and go forward with it, then why not? It's their town. They can decide. They can lead the initiative, and then we can weigh in on wherever we stand as well. But I think it's not too late. Why do it next year when the whole focus is just on us and that tax? And so that if it's us, I agree. Let's study it because government moves slower. We're going to hire and do all that stuff. But if a citizens group is ready, let's empower them and let's support them.
Well, we can move on and open it to the public at this point. I think staff, have you heard enough from us as far as that there's going to be a lot of more work to be done, and so at this point, I'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item, please come to the podium and give us your thoughts.
Come on, man. Jeez, school board. Just a couple of thoughts. Matt Baskell. The first thing is on the hotel occupancy transportory tax. It was set at a 2% increase. Does it have to be 2%, or is that can be $10 a night at a hotel room?
I believe there's no cap on it, and you can do kind of what you want with it. The comparison was the 10% the city of Clovis was at with the city of Fresno. So could be 3%, could be, and I defer to my former economic development director to talk about the impact of an increased TOT on our current occupancy rate.
Just to go quick clarification, so I don't think you can set a flat rate. It has to be a percentage. I'm not, as the Economic Development Director, fearful of us increasing to the same level as the city of Fresno as far as maintaining our occupancies or being competitive in the market. If we get too far past that, savvy customers, especially tour guides, will look for cheaper options in the market if they're filling up a hotel room with a busload of student athletes or what have you.
Okay. And the reason why, when we talked about this several years ago with the hotel rooms, we were looking at $5 a night just as throwing it out there, and that was going to generate $750,000 4 years ago. So that's why I was asking if $5 made a difference or a $10 a night room as opposed to 2%. Okay, and my second thing is on the 5-year forecast. I would be very cautious about saying we're going to have 15 officers in the next 5 years, because we've gone through this 5-year forecast for several years, and it hasn't increased. It was, I was promised that I would have 4 to 5 officers every year, and then something hits, and you can't fulfill those, you get one or two. And then it happens again, now we hit COVID, and we're going right back to where, Chief Fleming starts with less officers than I had, and we tried to build it back up. So when we talk about the 5-year forecast, and then we're gonna have 3 additional bodies every year, that's something to be very cautious about, and it takes a true commitment to say, yes, no matter what happens, we're gonna be able to give 3 officers per year. So those are my 2 comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else want to contribute, point us in the direction that the voters might want to hear?
Just a few comments. You say go. Being out here watching you guys, it's been a while since I've stood in front of you. I know that this community is proud of you guys. Every comment you guys have made have had substance. Everything has been valuable. One of the things I want to point out, and the committee did study some of this, Vaughn, you pointed out 2 sides. One, well, the citizens are behind it, get a committee going, let's put this thing together, let's go right now. And on the other side, you put a tax measure. The public in general doesn't know that we're in a mini crisis. As we commented in our committee, that if we weren't on the committee, we would not have known and understood the necessities of our police department and of our public safety. Now we know, but we're 25 people. How does our community know? They don't know it. Before I came in, I was like, Clovis is great. It's the best. We're the safest. I'm proud of that. Although, as we started dissecting it and pulling back the layers of the onion, you could see the cracks in the system. And this is what was pointed out by Kurt and some of the other presentations. So we know we need to start feeling those cracks a little bit and fixing them and stuff. But the public in general, as much as I would love to see something happen in November, it's impossible to educate the public as a whole of what is needed by this November. So being able to find an opportunity to throw something out at our police department and say, hey, we're listening, we're hearing, here's something, and that's where this hybrid model that I think Drew and Lynn are commenting on, I think holds some value from my perspective. It's up to you guys to make the decision, but I think it is an opportunity. Is it the solution? Not at all. Would I love to see something done in November? Yes, let's get them going. Let's get this 5 a year so we can get 25 over the next 5 years. Let's get that going. Can't happen that quick. It's going to take more planning. And so the comments are all valuable. The public doesn't know yet, Vaughn. Yet it would be nice to say, hey, public people, let's go, let's get on, let's rub. Now's the time. The timing is good. It is right. But it's the time frame from being involved in different levels that I've been involved in. It's kind of tough to make it all happen by then, even though I would love to see it. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else?
Good evening, Diane Pierce. Just to answer a few of the questions that I heard from the council members, one in reference to Councilman Bessinger's question about the user utility tax. I think one of the reasons that you see a high rate of success with something like a sales tax and a very low rate of success with the UUT is the voters' ability to understand what it is. And so I think that a UUT probably does have a lower rate of success because someone who is disinclined to put another tax on themselves is going to be even less inclined to go with one they don't even understand. And so I think that's a major consideration and why a sales tax would be a preferable road, in addition to the differences in the revenue that it generates. But I also think that in terms of looking at when to put it on, one thing I wanted to clarify is if it is a special tax that can go on an off cycle, but it is citizen initiated, it then would still have the 50% plus one qualification level. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
And then the other thing as far as, again, talking about when this could happen, I agree with the concept that it really needs to be one good shot if it's going to be done that way. But at the same time, I think it is important to recognize that there's an immediate need. And as far as what I could kind of gather from the members, not just of the Citizens Committee, but also the members of the public that attended every single meeting, really what we wound up with was probably about 30 people who have a better understanding of the need of the police department now. And so it's really going to be about educating the public. And I will say that as someone who follows the Clovis Police Department on Facebook and social media, I see a lot of posts about what they're doing, the calls they're responding to, the amount of work that they have to do. And not only does that make me even more proud of our department and what they do for our community, but it does increase the awareness. And I think there's a general sentiment in the public that crime is on the rise, not just elsewhere, but in Clovis as well. So I don't think we're starting from square zero, but at the same time, if this is the way it needs to be done, and I personally am not convinced. I think we do have to look at the economic and political climate as far as getting something passed in terms of a tax measure. And I think the other point that was really important that I took away was not only from the committee survey, and that it was 50-something% of people said that public safety is that #1 issue for what we need our city taking care of for us, but I believe staff even indicated that in the surveys they do of the community at large, however often that's done, that that's reflected as well. And so as I look at it, kind of comparing city budget versus personal budget kind of analogies, we want to make sure that our budgets are taking care of the top priority first and foremost, and then we kind of work down the line. And so I also thought that staff did an extremely good job of not just opening things up to us, but explaining it in terms we could understand. And so I don't say that at all to think that there's money in the budget that isn't going where it should go, but I think an even deeper dive into some of these things could be part of that education process for people to truly understand that the need exists if it does, and exactly the extent of how things would be handled. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Greg?
Just real quick, thank you very much. Normally I'm very shy. But I did want to talk about the TOT tax real quick. So I know, Bong, you had a concern if we went, up to TOT tax in 2022 and then we go back out for an additional. But Andy, you might be able to help us with this. When you ask for an increase in the TOT tax, what sort of explanation do you need to give the voters for the increase? Do you have to specifically say, police, or can you say, make it more of a general statement, this is to offset the costs from our visitors that have on our infrastructure in our community? If it's general enough, then if we went back a couple years later, then they aren't going to think, oh, we just did this. It's a different conversation and it's a different vote, in my opinion.
Andy, I'll jump in first. It's going to be that if we identified it as a special revenue dedicated to the police department, we would need to spell that out.
Okay.
If it was going to be a general tax, then it could be used for anything, and it would require an explanation of how it was going to be used, but it wouldn't tie future council members to commit that to the police department.
But it'd go right into the general fund.
Correct.
Where we know police and fire have the biggest piece of the pie. So just by using the same model, there's going to be additional officers given.
Correct.
Okay. That was my only comment. Thank you.
I have a question for Greg. Greg, from the chamber's perspective, not that you're speaking for your board, but
Yes.
From a business environment, do you feel like a tax that made us equivalent to the city of Fresno's rate would be harmful from the business perspective that you see at the chamber?
I don't think so. I think if we went above what Fresno had, that might be something, being equal. I think, here I'm going to blow, toot our chamber horn, but, we have great occupancy. We've had great occupancy through the pandemic, and I don't think it's just because of the tax. I think when customers are looking at what hotel I want to stay at, they don't know, sometimes they know what the tax is, sometimes they don't care. It's the room rate and then all the other stuff that gets lumped onto it. I just traveled out of state the last 5 days, stayed at 4 different hotels, 4 different cities, and there was a different tax for everything. There was improvement districts and entertainment districts and TOT and everything. And it's like, that's just the cost, of traveling. I think when they start looking at the amenities, I think they'll look at how safe that community is. I think they'll look, is it clean? They're going to look at the photos. They're going to look at the Yelp reviews. And those are things, those positive things that Clovis has compared to other communities. So I don't think it's going to be a factor.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. Ironically, they stay here because it's safer here.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, that's what we're speaking about. But I'm not sure I've ever picked a hotel based on the occupancy tax of a city. That actually doesn't even cross my mind to ask what that was, because I feel like, well, what choice do I have? I want to stay at this hotel in this city. I'm just going to pay that rate. So, thank you. That helps.
Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Nilla, and I just want to say, as someone who I travel for business 2 to 3 times a month, I'm learning a lot that I should be looking more closely perhaps at my hotel room bills. But I will honestly say when I look to stay at a hotel, the number one thing I look for is safety. Bottom line, doesn't matter where across the state or out of state I'm traveling. To that point, though, I think that if you have a ballot measure that explains that we are looking to fund our police department with an immediate need, and we are doing that based on the people who are coming to visit our city, I don't think that's a hard sell. I don't think we need to assume that the voters are ignorant, but I do think from an awareness standpoint, I had no idea how much was needed until we heard the chief talk about it. And I know that with everyone that I have discussed it with on whatever ends of the spectrum, right, and nobody wants to pay more money, there have been a lot of eyes that have just said, oh, wow, I didn't know, I didn't realize. I don't personally, as a taxpayer, I'm not worried about someone coming back to me to say, we have a need, we have a further need, because I can see with my own eyes the growth that's happening in my city. I'm choosing to live here because it is safe and I have children. That is what I care about, right? I want to make sure what I'm paying for is high quality and we get what we pay for. The second thing is I would love to hear what Councilmember Whalen has to say too. Thanks.
Anyone else here in chambers wishing to comment on this item? And no one else? What about the web?
None.
Nobody on the web, so bring it back to the council.
Before Bob has an opportunity to speak. No, I'm being serious here. When I went to a leadership school, and they talked about successful corporations in the Fortune 500 realm, and the CEO or whoever was in charge of the meeting would always say, Bill, you're the no man. Tell us why this is a bad idea. And that was their function. Not that you're always a no man, but we need to hear, okay, here's the problem you're not thinking of. And we need to welcome that opinion because, quite frankly, it's an important issue and everybody needs to be heard. That's all I have.
Lynn, do you want to hear what I have to say? I just want to know what this
I've heard it every year for 21 years. No, of course I do.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for your patience and me making my comments. I also want to thank the Citizens Advisory Committee. It was no easy task, and we really do love it when our citizens actively engage with us and learn a little bit more about what's going on in their community, and even from the perspective of a council, because you became very informed as a result of your experience, and so you know a lot about tough decisions that we have to make up here. So I'm glad it feels good to be able to share that burden sometimes. And so, thank you for being willing to do that and report out to us. And so, for me, what was really important as we went into this conversation is, my two questions, which is, how is it that we've been able to maintain that we are the safest city in the Valley despite the fact that we have had, no significant addition to patrol officers? And then secondly, where did all that money go? Because we increased the public safety budget, and again, public safety is fire and police. Depending on which accrual method you use, we increased the public safety budget by 65% to 75%, depending on what figures you look at. So you would think that if we increased that budget over the last 10 years, from 2012 fiscal year to the 2021 fiscal year, you would think that we'd be able to add more patrol officers. Well, and in truth, we did, and I'll just try to make it as brief as I can, but from 2012 to 2014, we added 4. From 2013 to 2014, we added another 4. From 2014 to 2015, we added 7. From 2015 to 2016, we added 5. From 2016 to 2017, we added 7, and I better stop here because these are new employees in public safety, in the police department. These are not all necessarily police officers, right? So from 2016 to 2017, we added 7 personnel. From 2017 to 2018, it was 0. 2018 to 2019, it was 1. 2019 to 2020, it was 3. And then again from 2020 to 2021, it was 1. So we pushed really hard to increase the amount of personnel in the police department, the first 5 years of this last decade, and then we really started to slow down. And so I think that if we, at least for me, when we started to listen to the Citizens Advisory Committee as to, answering those two particular questions, what I learned is that we are the safest city in the Valley and maintain our position as the safest city in the Valley, despite the fact we haven't added a significant amount of patrol officers, at least recently, is because we have some force multipliers. And it's to Chief Baskel's credit, it's to Chief Fleming's credit that, they worked with what they had. And what they had was a very limited budget. And so they had a lot of community services officers. That was a really big push, I think, from Chief Baskel. We have always had the ability, I think, to increase our technology. So, for example, we have a lot of cameras throughout the city of Clovis. We have license plate readers in the city of Clovis. We have drones now and a lot of our patrol vehicles. So these force multipliers, I think, have allowed us to maintain our position as the safest city in the Valley. But another aspect of it is something that I make observations of at the district attorney's office, and probably you make observations of as well during your role as a Citizens Advisory Committee. And Drew addressed it during the time that we were last together as a Citizens Advisory Committee with the council, and that's our citizens. In the city of Fresno, and I know we pick on the city of Fresno often, but where they have the highest amount of crimes, they don't have much in the way of citizens' participation in trying to eliminate crime. In fact, in the city of Fresno, if there's a crime that takes place, people are running from law enforcement. They do not want to participate in the criminal justice process. In fact, people who get shot, they don't identify who it is that shot them. And the people who are, related to the person who got shot, they don't want to identify who it is that shot them. And we can't get them to come to court. We can't get them to testify. And frankly, I'm just going to say shame on them for not participating in that process. Now, in the city of Clovis, we have citizens who are actively engaged in the criminal justice process. Frankly, when I'm looking at the police reports, it's like if somebody commits just even a petty theft somewhere in the city of Clovis at a business, not only is the business owner actively engaged in the prosecution, but even folks who are at that particular store at the time that that petty theft took place, they're chasing the person down. They're tackling that person, and they're holding them, sometimes doing more than holding them, until law enforcement from the city of Clovis arrives. So that's one of the reasons why I believe that we've been able to maintain our position as the safest city in the Valley. I'm not ignoring the fact that we need more patrol officers. I think we're all on board with the idea that we need patrol officers. The 5-year forecast recognizes that as well. But I think Chief Baskel raises a great point. To what level are we going to be committed to that? This council may be here for the next 5 years. They may not be here. And maybe we will all, swear an oath that we're going to maintain at least that, 3 more officers, new patrol officers every year. And we may be even willing to spend our emergency fund reserves so that Chief Fleming knows that we're always going to maintain that additional 3 patrol officers every year in the budget. Because frankly, our emergency fund reserve has never been as high as it is right now. We've been as low as even less than 5% in our emergency reserves. We're now at close to 25%. And that's been our goal. We have no desire, no need, because our rating is as good as it really can probably get if we're at a 25% emergency reserve. And fortunately, we've been able to get there. So that emergency reserve is there for a reason. And that's when, we have ups and downs in the economy, ups and downs in the amount of funds that come in, then we can actually tap into that emergency reserve. And then when we have excess funds coming in, we can replenish that over time. So I'm pretty confident that this council is going to say, yes, we're committed to those 3 patrol officers. I can speak for myself as far as that transit occupancy tax is concerned. What we learned as a result of going through the Citizens Advisory Committee, or that process that we went through as a council, is that there's been, I think it's a 300% increase in calls for service in our hotels and motels in the city of Clovis. To me, that's a cry out for we need to increase our transit occupancy tax, at least get to the level where the city of Fresno is, because those people are enjoying the benefits that come with a safe community, yet sometimes they're bringing some problems, and we have to address them. I am of the opinion that we'll probably be able to call it something then a transit occupancy tax increase when we put that on the ballot. And we can probably have a nice little heading for it, which is going to be a little more communicative. Hotel occupancy tax, just something to make it more understandable. And there is an urgent need for it right now. And I think that if we do get it on the November ballot, we can get it on the November ballot, and it would meet some of those urgent needs. In the meantime, maybe this may be news to some of you. I'm not going to be on the council in January, and those people who are on the council can study the issue a little bit more fully and make a determination in 2024 whether it makes more sense to have a sales tax after we see what has happened. But there are some concerns that I have. I'm not for a sales tax. I love that we are the safest place for people to shop and the cheapest place for people to shop in the city of Clovis. And that's a selling point that we probably need to sell more regularly to get more people here, not just so that we can have more sales tax revenue, but so that we can have greater success for our small business owners. I'm of the opinion that, it's a rising tide that lifts all boats. And if we can encourage more and more people to come shop in Clovis, because frankly, we've got a great place to shop, and it's a safe place to shop, and our products are cheaper because we don't have as high a sales tax as they do on the other side of Willow, then we can continue to remain the safest community in which to shop, as well as also have the lowest prices. And as far as a parcel tax is concerned, those of us who are property owners, we get this every year, right? And if you've ever looked at it and studied it, what you're going to learn is that there are all kinds of taxes that we're paying through property taxes already. There are 6 community college taxes that are listed, and there are 11 Clovis Unified School District taxes that are listed. So that may be something that triggers somebody to say, yeah, I'm not interested in another parcel tax. So anyway, I guess for my purposes, I'm here for a limited amount of time, but I'm all for the idea of having the transit occupancy tax put on the ballot in November, and then us commit, you guys commit, or whoever's going to be up here commit to making sure that we at least do those three, and then whatever that transit occupancy tax brings in, we bring in a couple more. If we have another year where we're losing 14 officers for retirement or for other reasons, then, you know, that's going to be even tough, I think, to find 19 or 20 people in any given year. So it's I appreciate that the chief is up for the task, but it's, you know, it's going to be challenging. And then finally, I'll try to end with these comments. This is a little bit of deja vu. In 2009, the economy was not good. We are going through another time when the economy is not going to be good. If I was to be opposed to the sales tax, which I'm not allowed to be as a judge, I'm not going to be participating in the political process, I think it would be pretty easy to defeat it with not very much money and some pretty good messaging. And the reason we were outspent 10-1 back in 2009, and the city had a consultant which was educating the community. I felt it was campaigning, but regardless, they had 250,000 on their side, we had 25,000 on our side, and it was still went down by a 2 to 3 margin. And the reason it did that is because it was certainly the wrong timing for a tax increase. And finally, I'll end with this, because I mentioned it last week. The city of Clovis loves public safety. We are representative of the community. We have always understood that it's public safety, our schools, and strength of community which sets Clovis apart. And we acted on that as a council, and we increased our public safety salaries to the 75th percentile. Of all of the 9 cities that are in, you know, compared to the city of Clovis in the state of California, we said, we don't want to just give our public safety personnel, you know, the median or the average. We want to give them even more. So we said, okay, 75th percentile. So we increased the salary of our public safety personnel. And you know what else we did? We went with 3% at 50, which is for every year that you've been employed as a public safety person, you would be able to get 3% towards your retirement pension at the age of 50. And so nobody gets that. In fact, even in public safety, nobody gets that anymore, because the state of California said almost that's reckless, and you shouldn't be doing that. But we did that because we love our public safety, and we wanted to illustrate that in a way that is, you know, tangible. But then the consequences of us increasing the salaries by that amount and increasing the pension so that it was so high is that we have this huge CalPERS bill, which we are swallowing actually, we've swallowed and we're trying to digest over time. And we're not going to get over it, and, you know, for another 10 years. I think it doesn't plateau. I mean, we're still paying an increasing rate in CalPERS year over year, at least for the next 5 years. And it's not going to plateau until those 5 years. So I don't want anybody to think that the city council doesn't appreciate public safety. We do. And we've exhibited that, and there have been some consequences to exhibiting that. And we want to make sure that we're really smart in our approach as we go forward in how we also exhibit that in the future. So anyway, in sum, I'd say the TOT on the November ballot seems like a no-brainer to me, and we can make sure that the messaging is done in a way that is easy to understand and effective. And then if that's not enough, then, you know, maybe in November 2024 it can be readdressed. But I'll leave that up to you guys. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate your comments. When we talk safest city in the valley, that's based on uniform crime reporting. But the uniform crime reporting does not address speeding vehicles, property issues that aren't being maintained. I mean, we've had people come before council. I know I've personally gotten emails on my account complaining about vehicles racing, complaining about speeding cars and congestion and accidents. And these are the intangible things that don't count towards the UCR. And quite frankly, it's a quality of life thing for neighborhoods and commercial districts, which, you know, there's, you know, the old saying, the one on the nail, the horse was lost. The rider was lost, the battle was lost. We can't continue to ride this horse until it loses a shoe. And I would, I think also that the prudent course is to go for the TOT in November. We're not going to be able to get this on the ballot in November. Secondly, it's going to be very difficult for us to find a consultant who can take this type of project on in that amount of time. And because if we're only going to get one shot at this, I disagree with Bob in the respect that I think Measure A in 2009 would have passed, but the state bumped the sales tax 1% like 10 days before that or something, which I think people went, oh, time out, that's ridiculous. So if we come to the public with the sales tax, we're going to have to do the polling and all this stuff, and that's going to take time. Whether it's 2024 or a special election in 2023, we can, that'll be something that we can explore. But if we go for quite frankly, in my mind, the low-hanging fruit, that does give us a little bit of breathing time to get things going. That's all I have.
Well, John, I just had a question with regards to if it's Citizens Initiative special tax for TOT, it can just be 51%.
50 plus 1.
Yeah,
correct.
for November.
Correct.
Okay. And then who gets the citizens? Do we go find, who's that?
The city's not involved.
So someone would have to step up, take that.
More than one volunteer out there.
Yeah, take that on.
Grassroots there.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
That's
And
correct.
follow whatever is required to get something like that on the ballot.
Correct.
Okay. But if we do it, then 4 out of the 5 can vote on it. If there's 4 votes, then it can move forward and get on the ballot? Is that how government? Yeah, but the vote will be 2/3, but to get on the ballot.
That's correct.
Is that how
It's 4/5 for a general and 3/5 for a special.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
It
If
could just be
it's-
3.
Yeah, it would take 4 council members to approve putting a tax measure on the ballot if it's a general tax. If it's a special tax measure, only a simple majority of the council must approve it to be a city measure.
And the TOT could be special or general.
Correct.
Wait,
So
yeah, can you say
to do all that homework where we're talking about where we want you to go research, that's pretty much us driven, I'm assuming, right?
That's
and
correct.
so if we went that route, would you get something ready in time for November?
If it was council driven?
Yeah, council driven, where you say we want to do this TOT, does that give you enough time?
I don't know, and I guess the answer would be absent polling, we could likely get it through the city attorney's office and before city council to get it to the county clerk by August 1st. But that would be placing an item on the ballot with limited to no research.
And then still also hiring a consultant, I'm assuming, to help, or maybe...
I doubt you could get a consultant on board to do polling. We're talking less than 90 days. It would take me 30 days to get a consultant on board, and by the time we have to get everything ready for the August, get into the county clerk, like I said, it would be absent polling.
Yeah, and I just want to know, I'd be interested to hear what Councilmember Ashbeck and Councilmember Bessinger, what your thoughts are on, I like the idea, but the realities of it for November, and share your ideas, because I think it's a good measure on our part.
So I don't think, and I'm sure I'm wrong, but I'm so seldom wrong, right, Bob? Right, Bob?
Depends on how you define seldom.
I think that a TOT doesn't need a consultant. I think it's a cost of doing business in the city of Clovis. And I think you're right, not to be I think most voters, I would look at it and go, well, I don't stay in that hotel. I'm good. You stay in it because you're coming from Cleveland, but I don't stay in it. So in some ways, for better or worse, I don't think that a TOT would require a consultant. I think it's a pretty straightforward ask of voters to impose a tax on people that don't live here. That seems like that seems like a reasonable calculation. So I think that would be, and we've done it before. We've had this measure before. So it's like we've never done one. So I believe we could be successful in 2022 with a TOT in November. As simple as it could be. I even think we could get to 66%. I don't know if we could find a group of citizens who could put a TOT together because they need funding themselves. So I'm not quite sure how that would go, but I bet we could get it if we initiated it. Because I think we've initiated the other TOTs in Clovis, haven't we?
We have increased, 15 years ago, we were at 4% and went to 10. It might have been 97. But it was a long time ago.
Well, I was on the council, so it has to be after 2001, okay. I thought. But I mean, I think the council initiated. So that's my take on it, but I still have.
And then, Scott, I would just ask you, can you tell me what the process would be to get a TOT on the ballot for November and get the information to the county by August 12th?
It's just a matter of bringing the proposed ballot language back to council to approve. So the council would approve the actual language that goes on the ballot, the question to the voters. And that could be, a couple of meeting process of tweaking language and, deciding whether or not there's going to be a sunset on it, deciding whether or not it's special or general. So those decisions would be before the council. But as far as crafting the language for the ballot measure, that's ultimately the council's approval. And then once it's approved, if it's approved, then it goes to the county for, all that stuff.
If I may, Mayor, I would just recommend kind of potential parallel tracks. So we don't need to make the decision that any approval of ballot language tonight. And there may be somebody out there in either in this council chambers or out in the community who wants to step up and try to get a TOT that's citizens-driven, and then we can withdraw ours, and that is going to, obviously lower the threshold significantly. But I'm not saying, well, let's defer on taking any action and going in that direction tonight because we need to count on the citizens. It's like, hey, if the citizens step up and do it, great. But if they don't, then we're left with the 66%, or 2/3.
And I bet we could find a consultant to weigh in broadly on TOT language. I can't imagine it's much different. So I think we could get some help if we needed some help with that, because the language matters, right?
True.
People vote on the line.
True. You have to be careful though, because it's not. When we have the consultant, that consultant is advising us on our efforts, not advising the citizens-driven one. They do that stuff independently.
Fair enough.
But it's going to be a public record, of course, and so they might learn a few things.
And the only thing I would like clarification on is if you're kind of directing us to begin the process to look at a TOT for November of 2022, are you asking us to go with a special dedicated to PD? Are you asking to do a general? Just thoughts on that. Yeah, and the threshold difference between the two and the success rate is pretty significant. So if you're asking us to go with a special for a TOT in November, it requires the supermajority, which is the 66.67%, which is significantly reduces the likelihood of success in reality compared to some sort of general, which would require 50+1.
Drew? I think we could make a reasonable ballot language that says we've had 300% increase in calls for service at hotels. Visitors need to pay their fair share for the protection that you paid for now. And whether we do it as a special only for police or into the general fund, and then there's a commitment by council that money gets earmarked. Of course, things can change, but if John, is what you're saying that if we say it goes into the general fund, it's 50 plus 1, or is it 66% regarding?
General tax.
General tax.
It's
So
gonna
general
be
tax
50
is-
plus 1.
Use it on parks,
Right.
center.
You know, we could do it as a general tax and just make a policy statement that that money goes over there, and obviously, councils change, minds change.
And just to make sure we're on the same page, it's gonna be that, with a general tax, you could not commit future council to how those monies are spent.
Exactly.
But I think if we were to look at the percentages from our general fund that go to police and fire, that would probably.
Do it anyway. It happens anyway by osmosis. Okay, so I hear consensus. I hear try for a TOT tax increase by November 22 and hire a consultant anyway to try to get some informational data out there for our citizens and our voters, and one to equal Fresno.
Did we, I didn't, maybe I wasn't hearing it. I didn't think, or at least I didn't hear us talking about getting a consultant for the TOT.
Lynn brought it up, so.
That's what I thought she said.
Well, I think if we needed one, I think, John, you were saying, if you felt, if staff doesn't have the capacity to do the work, then I think we can hire somebody to help us, but I don't think it's.
Not like we're polling.
No.
Correct. We can reach out, and availability, I'm not sure, it's tax season, so I'm not sure how busy they're gonna be, but, we could reach out for assistance and see what we can get.
Through the CAC process, I was made aware that Scott's office has quite a bit of expertise on hand to help too.
Yeah, I mean, as far as drafting the language and putting this stuff together, our office can do that. We're not gonna be doing the community polling. If there's no interest in doing the community polling, if we're satisfied that the TOT is probably the low-hanging fruit, that you don't need a lot of community polling for that as opposed to a parcel tax or sales tax, then yeah, I think we can proceed without a consultant in order to get it on the ballot.
And direction for staff today too is it be a general tax?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. That way we don't have to worry about that 66. Yeah.
Okay. You need any further direction?
No, that's perfectly clear, and I would shoot for the June 6th meeting for us to bring something back to just begin the discussion.
Okay.
I also.
If anybody wants to.
Volunteer. I do think we should reach out to our hotel
Industry.
committee or through the chamber and just so that they're gonna hear about it on the news at 11 o'clock tonight. So I just think it would be worth reaching out to them that we're thinking about this. They may be the biggest champions. They want their people to be safe too. They're not super happy, I'm sure, about Clovis PD showing up 12 times some night at some hotel. That can't be good for business. So they may be the biggest champions of the idea.
Yeah, there is a hotel operators group that meets monthly that my office sponsors, and we can communicate with them.
Okay, so I think we're done with that item, and we'll go on to item 9, but that's for a 5-minute recess.
Okay.
Thank you for serving.
Thank you. Thank you. Night.
Sit down.
Okay.
Don't look so cheerful when you leave. Leave with the crowd. Why?
How are people that were involved in the fire? Red Cross put up 3 units about 12. Our folks were okay? Oh, and Fresno Fire came through? They used Fresno gas.
Where was the fire?
We actually, I'll take credit for it.
I want to call. I do. Okay. Okay, well, moving on to item 9, we'll come back into session. Receive and file information related to the analysis of the 2020 census data and March 2, 2021 election data. And our staff member reporting will be Carrie Shaw.
Carrie, can I jump in real quick? I just wanted to introduce James McCann from Lozano Smith, who is the lead from his office, who is available for questions. At that point, I'll turn it over to Carrie, who's going to provide the introduction.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the Council. Tonight, staff is returning to you with a presentation of the analysis of the 2020 census data and the March 2nd, 2021 election data. We have our demographer, Doug Johnson, with NDC online, as he will be presenting the analysis in just a bit. Before we jump into the analysis, I'd like to quickly review how we got here and the timeline that we are working with. You will recall that back in September of 2020, the city was served with a demand letter for the council to be elected by districts. Currently, the council members are elected in at-large elections where each of the 5 council members are elected by the registered voters of the entire city. At the time the city received this demand letter, the most recent data that was available indicated there was no evidence of racially polarized voting in the city's elections, and that the makeup of the city council reasonably reflected the demographics of the city. On November 2nd of 2020, the City Council approved Resolution 20-155, committing to engage in a meaningful public evaluation of the census data that was coming up in 2020 and the upcoming March 2021 election data to determine whether it is in the public interest to convert to district-based elections. And if determined necessary and appropriate, any action towards implementing district-based elections will be taken at a future meeting. Due to the pandemic, the publication of the final 2020 census data was delayed until November of 2021. Since receiving the data, our demographer has completed his analysis of both the census data and the March 2021 election data, and will be presenting that information to you tonight. Before we hand it over to Doug to make his presentation, I'd like to also quickly go over the timeline that we are working with for the upcoming election in November. The election date is November 8th of 2022. Per the elections code, we will be calling the election most likely on the July 5th City Council meeting. Those interested in running in the election will be able to file their nomination papers starting July 18th and will have up until August 12th to file their papers. I mention these dates as they are important to keep in mind as we are quickly approaching the election season. So with that said, I will turn it over to Doug, who is online, and he will present his analysis on the census and the election data. Doug, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes,
at
good
any
evening.
point.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, good. So good evening. Pleasure to be back with you, at least virtually, and thank you for that introduction. I'll go through these materials relatively quickly, kind of to introduce folks, and then of course I'm happy to answer any questions. And as you heard, you have legal counsel available as well to participate in the discussion. So first of all, just to set a big picture view, what we're talking about is how the council is elected. So currently, the city uses an at-large system where anyone in the city can run, and everyone in the city votes for all of the council positions. There are a couple of jurisdictions left that still use from district, where a council member has to live in a certain district. They have to be from that district, but the election continues to be citywide. That was never very common, and it's gotten even less so now because the California Voting Rights Act treats that as just like at large. So you don't get any benefit under the law from having that, or any defense under the law from having that system. What the California Voting Rights Act really pushes for is trying to get people to move to bi-district elections, where all the candidates have to live in a given district, and only the residents of that district vote for who's going to represent them. So it's a much smaller pool of people. Your individual vote counts more towards who's going to represent you, but you're only going to vote for one of the council members, not for the whole council like people do today. So with that introduction, we'll go to the next slide. So briefly, the California Voting Rights Act is a fairly complex piece of legislation, but briefly, it picks up where the Federal Voting Rights Act leaves off and then takes another step. So the Federal Voting Rights Act, which has been in place since 1965, has 4 tests you have to fail. And only if a jurisdiction fails all 4 of those are you found in violation and ordered into district elections. What California did with the California Voting Rights Act in 2002 was get rid of the 2 of those tests. So if you have polarized voting, then you're in violation of the law if there's a group that is not electing the preferred candidates. So the federal tests that required the protected class to be large enough to be the majority of a district, that does not apply under the California law. And the totality of circumstances test, where really it can't be coincidence. It has to be some indirect, overt or covert connection between race and voting has to be made. That requirement of federal law really doesn't apply under the California law. So it really boils down to just a statistical test of, is there what the law calls racially polarized voting, where one ethnic group that's a protected class is voting as a block for a certain candidate or a series of candidates, and those candidates are not getting elected. We go to the next slide. Our analysis at NDC of your recent elections and census and other data did conclude that there's no statistical conclusion. The numbers don't show any solid proof of any polarized voting occurring. So as I just mentioned, you have a diverse council, and we're not seeing that kind of stark polarization that the law usually addresses. And it would add to that too, obviously the last election we're looking at is still a March odd year election, and we would expect changes in voting behavior and changes in who turns out with the city's move to a consolidated November even year election coming up. Next slide. So that was kind of an introduction. The rest of this should have a big if. So the rest of this is information on if you decide to go to district elections. This would be the process. I should note, you'd be joining, goodness, we don't have an exact count, but we've been trying to keep track of it, but we're at around 200 cities now, that have moved to bi-district elections, plus school districts, community college districts, and special districts. So this process is pretty well set up. Should the council choose to go there, and I do want to emphasize for those watching, that decision hasn't been made yet. But if you do, the process is set by statute. You have to hold 2 initial hearings. Before any draft maps are drawn, these are really educational and to get initial public input. Then we would release draft maps, both drawn by your consultant and any maps that residents have drawn. Those have to be posted 7 days prior to the 3rd hearing, and then the 3rd and 4th hearings, plus additional ones if the council chooses to add more, would be held to discuss those draft maps, revise them, get to the best map possible for the city. And you see the mention of election sequence here. You have to pick both a map and which seats will be up in which election year. And then you'd have to adopt the map. And as you just heard, there is very limited time. The map has to be in place before candidates start filing. So in terms of 2022, we're really looking at the clock is up here because it would have to be in place by the end of next month. The next slide. When drawing maps, we really have 3 sets of rules and guidelines. So first, we have federal laws. They're the first set of requirements. You see them on the left. An equal number of people, and it is total population based. It's not an equal number of registered voters. It's each council member has to represent an equal number of people. Then we have to ensure that we comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And we, as your demographers, would work with your legal team to make sure that the draft maps that come before you do obey all those rules. And while race can be a factor, it cannot be what the U.S. Supreme Court calls the predominant factor. That's when you roam into racial gerrymandering, which is also illegal under federal law. So those are our must-dos and requirements from the feds. Then the state has a new law called the Fair Maps Act that if you follow the county or the Fresno process, you probably heard a lot about. But this is a new law that came around in 2020. And it sets a prioritized list of 4 requirements. First, the district have to be contiguous. Then they need to avoid dividing neighborhoods and what the law defines as communities of interest as much as possible. They need to follow easily identifiable boundaries like freeways, rivers, things like that. And they need to be compact, which the law defines as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. State law also requires that the lines not be drawn to favor or discriminate against a political party. So those are the federal and state requirements. Then once you address all of those and you're compliant with all of those, you can get into what the law calls other traditional redistricting principles. These are not requirements. These are, but they're considerations that the courts have approved looking at. So this is where you get respecting the voters' choices by where possible, not pairing current council members together in a given seat. The idea being let the voters decide which council members have earned re-election, rather than the lines dictating to voters you might want to re-elect these 2, but you can't. So again, this is a traditional redistricting principle. It's not a requirement, but it's something you can try to do if you wish to. And you can also slightly, within that equal population requirement, slightly underpopulate a district that you know is going to grow faster than the other ones do, to try to maintain that equal population for a little bit longer. So those are, again, principles or goals. Those two are not requirements like the others are. So we go to the next slide. You heard mentioned earlier about your demographics. When looking at these maps, obviously we take into account a lot of demographics, and I'm not going to go through all these different numbers, but everything you see on this screen would be provided for each potential election district. So obviously key importance is in the top left. You see total population. That's where we need to get equal numbers in each district. So we'd be getting just under 20,000 per district if you're going with 5 districts. And then you can see the breakdown, the citizen voting age population, where it says 25% of the citizen voting age population is Latino. That's the key number we look at to make sure the map complies with the Federal Voting Rights Act, because that data is really the best number we have for estimating potential eligible voters in a given district. But we also have some numbers on registration and turnout. We have language spoken at home, which is also commonly looked at to define communities. There's down in the bottom right, you can see income levels, single family data versus multifamily data, and then one that's very commonly referred to, which is areas that are more heavily renter versus more heavily owner occupied housing. So all these factors come into play when you're looking at designing districts if you're going to district elections. We go to the next slide. This is just a map graphically showing one piece of that demographic data. This is Latino Citizen Voting Age Population, or CVAP. This is where we talk about when we're trying to comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act, we want to make sure that areas that are more particularly heavily concentrated Latino eligible voters, so the areas shown as green, yellow, and red on this map, are not divided by district lines. So it's not necessarily that the southwestern corner, where you can see some greens and yellows, necessarily has to be with that central area that's more reds and yellows. But each of those two pockets and each of the concentrated areas would need to be kept together and not divided up. So this is one example of the kinds of things we'd look at as we're drawing maps. The next slide. And then a lot of resident input is part of this process. That's why we say it's, almost mid-May. We only have until the end of June. That's not much time. We wouldn't be able to get much public input in this process if we tried to rush it. So we do want to hear, what is your neighborhood? What are its boundaries from the residents, so that we can comply with that California requirement to keep neighborhoods together. We can also look at public testimony, planning records, development records, things like that. But it really is best to hear from people. How do they define their neighborhoods? Is it around a park, around a school, around some other landmark, between major roads? Anything is really acceptable, as long as we're hearing where residents think of their neighborhood. And then the next slide. And then the law defines communities of interest as something else that should be kept together. These are, again, geographic areas that have a shared social or economic interest. So it could be, a neighborhood that most people speak Spanish, or a neighborhood that is more renters than most areas in the city, or an area that is shared by a city or county policy. So it has a particular interest in traffic or whatever that issue may be. And then the law has a second question to define a community of interest. Does it benefit from being included in a single district? So that concentrates that geographic area and the peoples in it, their voice to elect that one council member. But some areas do actually prefer to be divided. It obviously reduces their chance of choosing the one from their area, but it gives them 2 council members that are accountable to them. So we often get this with like downtown business districts, or especially with large active senior retirement communities that actually prefer to have 2 areas. So this is where we go through this public process in redistricting and get public input on these issues. And as noted here at the bottom, the definition of community of interest can be very flexible, but it cannot be tied to a political party, incumbent, or a candidate. So you can't say this, my neighborhood all supports so-and-so, So we should be a community of interest. That doesn't meet the legal requirements. So we go to the next slide. And this is a process that is very focused on public input, both on defining neighborhoods and communities and on actually drawing maps. It's an unusual issue where the public is not limited to simply reacting to a proposal from the council or from staff. In this case, you can actually go right out and draw your own map. So should the council decide to go this way, there are a variety of tools that would be made available to the public to help them draw maps. Next slide. So this is really just to reinforce what I've been saying throughout this, which is if we do go down the road of going to district elections, it really is important for the public to weigh in and share their thoughts about defining neighborhoods and communities, drawing maps, and then reviewing and reacting to the maps when they do come up. So if the council does decide to go that route, we would look forward to working with the council, city staff, legal, and all the residents of the city to hopefully weigh in and get your input on this process. I think that's the last slide, but let's make sure. Yes. So again, I went through all this fairly quickly. I'm happy to discuss any of this. Thank you very much.
Questions for Doug? Bob?
Yeah, Doug, you had mentioned in your first slide related to there's no statistical data to suggest that racial polarized voting is taking place. Am I recollecting that correctly?
So yes, the statistics don't conclude that there's polarized voting. One of the dangers in this realm is that there are folks around that bring legal challenges anyways. They kind of leap from inconclusive data to bring the challenge. But the math is definitely not conclusive that there is polarized voting. It does not show a pattern of polarized voting.
So I don't know if you're in a position tonight to be able to show us or explain to us why that is true, or how that is determined. If so, that'd be great to hear from you on why there is no data to indicate that there is. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that there is no data to indicate that there's racially polarized voting.
Yeah, so I don't have like slides prepared to show that, but I can briefly discuss it. The way this analysis is done is we identify precinct by precinct the percentage of the vote that a given candidate gets, and then the percentage of the voters in that precinct who are Asian American, African American, or in particular here, Latino. And we use state data, which is imprecise, but it's the best data available to try to identify that ethnic percentage. And as the precincts get more ethnic, whichever ethnic group we're looking at, if a candidate does better as the precincts get more Latino, then that translates into a pattern of Latinos prefer that candidate. If the candidate does worse as the precincts get more Latino, then it's considered that the Latino voters do not support that candidate. Now that, of course, assumes a fairly steady connection and a fairly steady progression as precincts go from 10% Latino to 25% Latino. Obviously, that's not how the real world works. A lot of factors go into vote decisions, and those percentages bounce all around that line. And so there are mathematical tests for, are we getting a reliable connection between the precinct by precinct dots and the line estimating that ethnic group's vote? And if the dots bounce around a lot, then it's not statistically conclusive. If they're all tightly grouped around that line, so it's a clear connection, then that's considered polarized voting. And so we're not, in your case, we're not getting that tight connection between the line and the dots.
So, and you're basing that off of the last city council election, which was in March of 2021?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so is it fair to say then that the data would show that in March of 2021, there was no significant difference between, heavily Latino, because I know we're focusing on that Latino vote, heavily Latino precincts and heavily white precincts when it came to who got the most votes?
Well, I want to be careful with the phrasing. So,
Okay.
because that's a little bit of a different, just statistically, that's a little bit of a different question than the one we're really focusing on. So I want to, forgive me, but I want to keep it limited to, we're not seeing, a statistical conclusion that there is polarized voting. Which means the Latinos are preferring one candidate who, or I'm sorry, Latinos are preferring a series of candidates who tend to lose.
Okay, so let me ask it maybe, and I know you want to be careful with the phrasing, and I'm just trying to make it simple, and maybe there's going to be some tension between that. But is it fair to say that across the city of Clovis, people, no matter what color their skin may be or what their surname may be, they generally vote the same? It doesn't matter?
No.
The color of their skin? Okay, so I want to hear more from you about that.
So just as the numbers bounce around, how to describe it? So, and there's not a statistical conclusion that there is a clear connection between Latinos voting for candidates who tend to lose. That doesn't, there are three realms you can fall into. A statistical conclusion that Latinos vote for candidates who tend to lose, a statistical conclusion that Latino preferred candidates tend to win, and then inconclusive statistics, where the math isn't giving us a yes or no either way. And my analysis was based on the first question. I didn't really dig into, at this point, the second, are we falling into the second or third question? Is there proof that everyone votes more or less the same, or is it just that the numbers are completely inconclusive?
Okay, and then moving on to, I think something that we have thought about, at least that I've thought about, is that if we were to go through, well, we know we're going to be going into November 2022, where the city council is going to be on the ballot, during at least a gubernatorial election cycle, and the turnout is expected to be higher. Is it your expectation that the data will be more helpful as a result of having higher voter turnout like we expect to have in November of 2022? Or did you believe that was a significantly, at least statistically significant amount of data that you were able to obtain from the March 2021 election?
I think I would say both. When we get higher turnout, which is likely, that's what tends to happen, but doesn't always happen, but it's what tends to happen when you have a consolidated election, that more data tends to generate more reliable estimates. So it may give us a more conclusive finding one way or the other. Not necessarily, but it's impossible to know until we see the data.
And, okay, this will hopefully be my last question. What would racially polarized voting look like to the point where you would say, hey, you've got racially polarized voting here, you need to go to districts? What would that look like?
Oh, we see that fairly regularly, where there's a clear demographic split in the jurisdiction, where we have precincts that are 60, 75% Latino, and one candidate is getting 90% of the vote in those precincts, and the other one's getting 10% of the vote. And on the flip side, we have precincts that are 95% white, and the votes are flipped. So we do get jurisdictions where it is a very clear line, certainly.
And we're not, at least to the degree that you're observing, we're not getting that here And I guess what we're left with is that there's no statistical conclusion that there is racially polarized voting, right?
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Ben?
Doug, just a follow-up question to Bob's point, what you just said, that in some jurisdictions, 90% of one ethnic group, 10% of the vote, that scenario, does that have to be in the same ethnic group? So if the neighborhood is 90% Hispanic and there's two candidates, Hispanic and a white, and the white gets 90% of the votes, is that what you're talking about? Is it that, or is it something else? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's an interesting twist. So this is hotly debated in federal law, and in California law, they kind of put down a marker to say elections where the candidate matches the ethnicity of the protected class voters in question carry more weight. So they carry more weight if there's
say that again. Say that again. Carry more weight?
Right, in the analysis. So if there's one election where there's a Latino running and you're looking at Latino voters as your protected class, then that election has a little more weight than one where it's just non-Latino candidates. But the latter election can play into it as well. It's just given a lower priority if there are others where there are Latino candidates. Does that answer your question?
Thanks. Thank you.
No question. Doug, I have a question. So the racial polarization voting, it's just your city. You're not comparing, even in a consolidated election, you're not considering choices for governor, congressman, state assembly, nothing. It's just as to those being elected in that particular city.
It's a similar answer. Those elections have more weight. The problem with statewide elections and district, state district elections is you get into the partisan side of it. It becomes hard to differentiate, are people voting for the ethnicity or are they voting for the D or the R? And you get into the dynamics of having to survive a primary and that kind of stuff. So the law fairly heavily favors looking at local elections because these are nonpartisan elections. So yes, your city council races have much more weight. But if you end up in court battle, we'll end up with 20 or 30 elections being looked at by both sides, and they'll throw those in and try to make the case that they also apply.
Okay. So they might make that case that the other questions on the ballot do apply.
Yes, if you have a lawsuit brought against you, yes, they certainly try to bring that in. And then the one that tends to be more relevant and more often brought in would be local ballot measures, or even the local vote on a statewide ballot measure, because those are also technically nonpartisan. They don't have a D or an R on the ballot after their name.
Okay. Any more questions for Doug? Okay, thank you, Doug. Bye.
My pleasure.
Any further, Carrie?
I would just ask Scott or James if they had any closing comments.
I think the only comment I would make is, receive and file tonight, so you can give us direction to move any direction you wish. I guess my only other comment would be just know that more than likely, even if you were to decide tonight, direct us to bring back a resolution of intent to move to districts, it's almost impossible to have districts in place by November 2022 anyways. So even if we were to move with urgency beginning next week, the first election that council districts would be in place would be November 2024. So just keep that in mind, I guess.
And it's prudent to see the results of November 22, because like the demographer told us, it's a bigger pool of voters and more information to digest and analyze. And that way we can see if, in fact, Clovis is actually polarized, but because of local off-cycle elections, it doesn't appear to be so. But if we wait, if we don't do anything to impact this next election, then we get more data regarding what the citizens actually feel or whether they're being disenfranchised or not, right? Because of the sample size of the voters.
Well, correct. I mean, again, if we were to start the process to move to districts immediately and start the map drawing process and even have the map drawing process complete before November of this year, those maps would be drawn without the benefit of the November 2022 election data. And they wouldn't, those maps again would be in place for November 2024. They wouldn't be in place for the November 2022 election, but those maps would be drawn without the benefit of the data from the 2022 election.
So I think this is not dissimilar from the last item. I think you get one chance to make this call. And I don't think the data today shows that it's racially polarized by definition of the act. I think the data in November of 22 will be richer. And I also think, I mean, fair political or public process can't happen by July 5th. That doesn't make, I mean, that isn't even physically possible. So, I mean, I'd like to think about this a bit, but that's my general take. I also think we could do some sort of public, we could have focus groups, we could have citizens academies, we could talk about it as a community for a couple of years and socialize the idea that way. The data is just the data, but what do people really think about it? So, I mean, I'm not convinced today we need it based on the data, but I surely don't think we can get it by November. But I think more data would give us 2 cycles that would be instructive, and then we'd get some political or some public process, public input, and then see what happens. But I surely don't think we can do it by November. Nor does the data indicate we should.
My comments too is that continue with the philosophy and the spirit of our last resolutions, that we're exploring, we're studying, we're being methodical, and what we need now is that one new sample size that will be brought on by the November 22 election. And then if we absolutely see that there's racial polarization going on in the electorate, then we will act as a council to remedy that. So I think our resolutions have been pretty clear as to what the spirit has been, what our direction has been. We're not ignoring this question. We're just saying we need better data, and the only way to get that better data is to wait till after the November 22 election to keep studying it. And we're committed to study that because we in Clovis do not want to disenfranchise those people that might be protected.
Carrie, is Doug still on the line?
Doug, I've got a question for you. What's it going to take for you to actually conclude
that there is no racially polarized voting in Clovis? Because right now it seems like there's no statistical conclusion there's racially polarized voting. Is for me to ask the question whether there is racially polarized voting in Clovis a question that is never going to be answered no matter how much data you have?
Well, part of the challenge is that we don't have a clear legal standard here. So there's no court decision that said this much statistical confidence meets our test, this much fails it. So it's very hard. At this point, with the state of the law, there is no point where I can say 100% you're safe. There is a legal team out there who freely admits their data is not statistically conclusive, but they still argue that it's sufficient to prove a case. And so far, no jurisdiction has won, so we don't know where that line is.
Let me ask the question, just kind of the opposite question then. How much data do you need, or is it possible for you to gather enough data to be able to say conclusively there is racially polarized voting in your community? Is that something you can tell us at some point, if it's true?
If it happens, yes. There are certainly situations that is clearly racially polarized voting. It hasn't happened in your jurisdiction, but that doesn't mean that there won't be some controversy that comes up that drives polarization. I mean, we've even seen groups that want to push district elections go in and only campaign in one neighborhood, so that with unknown candidates, so that only the voters in that neighborhood know that candidate, and it creates statistical polarization. So yes, you could very well get it down the line after future elections if just voter patterns in your city change, or if some group drives that change. That you could certainly reach that point where we come back and say, yes, you were waving a red flag and you have a big problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Doug.
No more questions for staff or consultant? I'll open it to the public. Anyone here in the public wishing to comment on this item, please come forward. Anyone on the web?
No.
It's like that. So it's a receive and file. I say we stay the course. The spirit of our resolutions have been, we're studying it. We're earnestly studying this issue because we do not want to disenfranchise the voters of our city, and we continue the process because the best evidence, best data will come November 22.
Yeah, I think it's just really important that we, and you've stated it a couple of times, that we do, you can study something to death and never take any action, right? So at some point we have to be able to say, yeah, there's racially polarized voting and we need to go to districts, or nope, there's no racially polarized voting, so, it doesn't, ideally we would all like to think in the community of Clovis that people don't vote based on color of skin or surname. They vote on the quality of the candidate. I happen to believe that is true, and it sounds kind of challenging, though, for us to be able to ever reach a point where we'll be able to say conclusively, because of the confusion on this particular legal issue, that there is no racially polarized voting in the city of Clovis. So what do? We just keep on studying until we get, yes, there is racially polarized voting, or no, there is no racially polarized voting, or do we just kind of stay the course with at-large elections until one of those events happens? And so that's kind of where I am. If it's not, I think our tendency is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Right now, there's nothing that appears to be broken. There's no data to indicate that it's broken. And so we can wait until after November, but I don't know if it makes sense to, at some point we're going to have to make a decision.
And we'll have to make a decision because what's going to drive it is litigation. And so at that point, we're going to have to make a decision. Do we litigate? Do we say no? We have conclusive evidence that indicates that there has never been racially polarized voting in Clovis, and therefore our people, because we've done the things that Lynn has suggested with the community meetings and stuff, and our people don't want districts. Therefore, we're willing to defend that in court. But I think we all know that we've heard the consultants say that no one's won those cases. So it's an uphill battle now. But today the question before us is to receive and file. But what do we do? What do we do next? What's next steps for staff? I say stay the course and tell all those that are allegedly impacted by this that we're earnestly trying to figure this out. And the minute we recognize that there's in fact voter polarized voting in Clovis, we will change the way we do things. But if we find that there is no evidence of that, then it's a second question. I mean, it's a question before the whole voter population. Do we want to go to districts anyway? Because we're being forced to do so by some advocates, some activists who don't even live in our city. But today the question is not that, I don't believe. I believe it's, do we now start triggering the districts, or do we wait until November 22? And I say we vote, or we give direction to staff to do what we've been doing and wait till November 22, because we're earnestly trying to find reality. Whether other lawyers believe it or not, well, they'll litigate. And there's nothing we can do about that. You know, unfortunately, when it comes to those questions, our hands are tied, and we got to go by these election laws. And it sounds like even cities that earnestly try to discover reality, it's no good deed goes unpunished. They still lose. So, but it's a question. At that point, it becomes a question of our citizens. Are we going to spend millions of dollars to defend what we know is defensible, but the courts may not agree?
Understood.
Okay, so is that good for consensus and direction?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I've been told that a public hearing is an open consideration within the regular and special meetings of the City Council, for which special notice has been given and may be required. When a public hearing is continued, noticing of the adjourned item is required by per Government Code 54,955.1. And our item is 10, consider resolution adopting of the city 2022-23 annual action plan for the expenditures of community development block grant. And staff asks us to continue this to the May 16 meeting because they require additional information.
Yes, Mayor. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has not released our allocation numbers to us yet. Supposedly, we're going to be getting them early next week, and we can get that item to you on May 16th.
Any comment on that from the council? Any from the public? Any from the web?
No.
So, didn't take a motion for continuance?
Move that we continue this matter to May 16th.
Second. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Lynn?
She's here as an aye. Well, wait 1 second, 2 seconds. So, are you okay with, are you and I for continuing item 10?
Oh, let's talk about it.
Okay, so 5-0. Okay, 11, consider introduction of an ordinance adding section 1.9.03, electronic filing for Title I, Chapter 9 of the Clovis Municipal Code relating to campaign contribution limits to provide for electronic filing of campaign statements and statements of economic interest, Form 700, and again, Carrie. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The item before you is a proposed ordinance to provide electronic filing of FPPC forms, which include the campaign statements, which are the forms 460, 470, 497, and the statements of economic interest, which is the form 700. Currently, the city is only accepting paper filings for the campaign statements. For the Form 700s, the city is accepting both paper filings with original signatures and copies of electronic filings that were filed directly to the FPPC through the County of Fresno's electronic system. One of the main reasons staff is proposing this transition to electronic filing is due to a new legislation that requires the city to post all campaign statements on our website within 72 hours of its filing. Additionally, all of these forms posted online must have redacted addresses. This requirement went into effect on January 1st of 2021. So in the last year and a half, staff has been manually redacting addresses and uploading the campaign statements to our website. In an effort to streamline this process and ensure that we are in compliance with AB 2151, staff is proposing the use of an FPPC certified system, which will provide the ability to electronically file forms directly with the FPPC and automatically publish the campaign statements to the city's website with the addresses already redacted. Staff is recommending for council to approve the introduction of this proposed ordinance, which will provide for the electronic filing and also mandate filers to file electronically. Additionally, the system does also allow the city to allow its staff, approximately 100 staff, who are considered designated filers per the city's conflict of interest code, to file electronically, which is very helpful. If approved, staff will move forward with the implementation of the net file systems in time for the November 8th election, which is approximately, we hope to get it done by July 1st. After July 1st, one-on-one training will be provided by NetFile to all council members and your treasurers if you have one, and if they are not already using the system. Staff will also be available to assist in the training to ensure a smooth transition to the new systems. This concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions.
Questions for Carrie? From the council, none?
Oh, I don't know. Is it?
Is that Richard Egan?
I don't think so. He's a local in Fresno, Tom, I forget the last name.
I guess my question is just in terms of ease of use. I think the county's reporting is super slick. I mean, you enter at one time, it's populated from time to time. So I guess I would just hope that this is similar to that.
It is, and you can actually still continue to use the county system if you'd like, because you only file Form 700s through the county system. If you file through them, you still meet all the requirements, but this system is two parts. It's the campaign
disclosure. The campaign stuff, I hope it's as easy as that, that's all.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
So you could use the Form 700 system and the campaign statement system with us, or you could do one with us and one with the county.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, seeing no further comment from the council. What is it, public? Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this item? Anyone on the web?
No.
So, what is your pleasure, council?
I'll move for staff's recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
So approved 5-0. City manager's comments?
I have none.
Okay. Council comments, Bob? Ben?
Did we have a measures fee meeting? I'm gonna let Vaughn talk about that, because he's much better at than I am. That's all.
Vaughn? You're on the spot.
Yes, Measure C, we met in person last week at, Maddie Institute, and so we will meet again this Wednesday. We will hopefully decide or vote upon the allocation formula, and then also talk about duration and potentially, hopefully, reach a decision on the 20-year duration of the Measure C or 30-year. So, and if you have any comments, you can, let us know, so that way we can kind of go one way or the other. And then went to the Women's Chamber Luncheon recognizing Wilma on behalf of the mayor. So it was a great event as well. That's all I have.
True?
I cannot wait to hear what this is.
Well, I just returned from Germany about 26 hours ago. This is wine from the Heilbronn region of Germany. It is a very specific type of wine. It's impossible to get in the United States because it's consumed within the region, within Germany. This was, we have a little thing that we do when somebody leaves the country or something, you have to bring gifts. So I come bearing gifts.
I like that thing that they do then.
That's right. And
That's a good thing to do.
I'm hoping, this is a city that it mirrors Clovis in population, and I'm hoping that, I sent a year ago, or 2 years ago, I sent a letter, inquiring about sister city stuff. They said they responded, I never received it. I did send it again. They said that they were currently working with a city in the Ukraine, and due to the situation, they had to hold off. So hopefully at some point it'll come forward, but it's a red wine. It is amazing, and that's your gift.
Thank you.
And it's got a great bottle too.
And Jeff is leaving in 7 hours for Germany, so if you like it a lot, tell me and we can get more.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and, my turn. I just want to thank everybody for caring about me and knowing that I had a little bout with pneumonia, but.
No, you had a big bout of pneumonia. Do not understate it. For your wife, I'm saying that. Stop it. It was big.
It was pretty big.
Thank you.
It required 4 days of hospitalization, so, it was pretty big. All my bottles were out of control, and they finally got it under control after like almost 2.5 days. But I'm probably 90% now, but I thank all of you who cared enough to send me a note or two and make sure that I was still had a pulse and stuff. So.
And you got your braces off.
Yeah, I did.
Nice.
And but it's an ordeal. I had no symptoms other than what appeared to be flu, but no coughing or sneezing or runny nose, but everything else. But then I got this sharp pain, and that's what I think, besides my daughter and wife crying at my feet to go to the hospital, I think the pain is also what finally drove me there. And you can't be too macho. You gotta go when you start feeling things are different. And I've never had pneumonia in my life, and so I don't want to ever have it again. So if I ever get that pain at the side of my chest, I'm going to the doctor immediately. So.
We're glad you're better.
So it was good. Modern medicine, hydration, and antibiotics, like big old horse pills. I think that got me out of it. They never had.
And frequent naps.
Oh, I slept throughout my stay at the hospital there. So I had great service there at Clovis Community Hospital. So we're lucky to have a facility like that in our backyard and that take care of people. So.
All the cool kids were at the hospital.
Okay.
I was
in Germany.
In the emergency room in Berlin, Germany. I got a spider bite and almost had to fly home early.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff.
It's a mean German spider.
Okay? Yeah.
It's still a big welt.
It had a big red welt on my leg, and I woke up in Berlin and said, well, that's not good. And so they wanted to bit me for 2 days to give me IV antibiotics, and I said, no. Just do the IV antibiotics, give me some pills, and if it doesn't improve by tomorrow, I'm fine home. And the doctor said, well, that's exactly what I would do, but by protocol, I had to offer this to you. But I was, 200 euros, emergency room, which is $220. And I'm sweating it going, oh, they're going to hit me up for 1,500 euros, and I'm going to have to fight with the insurance company. I'm not even going to file the claim for 200 euros.
Okay, so.
I'm glad you're good too, but I'm glad not to be cool if that's what it is to get cool. It's going to the ER. I'm not interested in that cool.
And thank you, Vaughn, for stepping in on the Mother of the Year. Wilma's a great woman, and we need someone there. And I know you guys did something for her last week, so thank you, because she's a good family friend. So we're moving on to closed session, a closed door, non-public city council meeting allowed by state law for consideration on pending legal matters and certain matters related to the personnel and real estate transaction. We'll be doing item 12 as printed on the agenda, and we will not have anything to declare afterwards, and we'll adjourn after that.